Welcome to Dr. Creepen's dungeon. What terrifies us about the bizarre is not just the strangeness itself, but the way it warps reality into something unrecognizable. When the familiar bends into shapes we cannot explain, an object that shouldn't move, a sound with no source, a figure that doesn't belong, while our minds struggle to make sense of it, leaving us stranded in uncertainty. The bizarre unsettles us because it suggests that the rules we rely on, the quiet logic of the world, can be broken at any moment. And if that's true, then nothing is truly safe, as we shall see in tonight's collection of stories. Now as ever, before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's tales may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. That sounds like your kind of thing. Then let's begin.
The Creature in the Closet by Jake Wick. The first thing 9-year-old Bobby associated with that old farmhouse was this weird, musty smell. That was the end of him growing accustomed to the place, at least for a while. His uncle purchased the house because of the price and because of the economic opportunity the surrounding farmland provided. If he bought it based on looks, one would have to question his taste. The Kentucky farmhouse was about 100 years old, and at least 3 families, one from Romania and 2 from the States, had lived in it since it had been built. Not even the previous landowner knew much else of the history surrounding the old place. He only held on to the property for as long as he could put the land into tip-top shape in order to turn a profit. The man barely touched the house itself, save for a new paint job on the worn wooden exterior. Bobby could already picture that dank scent as he and his uncle pulled up to the front of the house. The car was packed to the brim, to the point that Uncle Todd could barely see through the back window. "And here we are," said Uncle Todd in his typical casual tone. For Todd, everything was done out of a certain level of obligation. One could reckon that he took on this attitude when Bobby's parents passed in a car accident. But his attitude didn't quite match his actions, as he was anything but a supportive guardian. All Bobby could think about was the smell of that house and of how just about every floorboard wailed when he stepped on it. Let's go," Todd continued. "Get your shit." Bobby got out of the car and began grabbing bags. Todd would periodically scold him, giving him a mini lecture on the proper way to carry bags. Bobby second-guessed everything he did, and it was no wonder as to why. When Bobby entered the house, that musty stink blasted its way into his nostrils. He could swear he saw a mouse scurry across the floor, but he would say nothing of it to Todd, who would lightly slap him around a bit for making things up. You could already hear what Todd would say, something like, "Complaining about a little mouse, you ain't great." "Right, your room's upstairs," said Todd, motioning to the staircase. Todd's room was downstairs, next to the living area. Bobby started up the stairs. Each one echoed a long and drawn-out creak upon each one of Bobby's steps. Bobby couldn't stand that noise. He feared hearing those creaking noises while he lay in bed. In fact, he dreaded the thought, for it would surely mean that his Uncle Todd was on his way upstairs. It wouldn't have been the first time. Bobby entered his bedroom. Across from his little bed was a closet, but the door had no doorknob, and so the door just hung open, leaving the dark void of the closet agape. To the right, on the adjacent wall, was a window that looked out at the cornfields. At the moment there was a glorious view of the sunset. Bobby didn't have time to appreciate it, though. This place made him uncomfortable. Bobby spent that evening choking down some canned green beans, awkwardly avoiding eye contact with his uncle. If Todd so much as suspected Bobby of being grossed out by the beans, he'd snatch him up by the back of his neck and make his belt sing. "How'd you like the new place?" Todd asked. "It's good," Bobby quickly replied. "Good, huh?" "Yeah, I like it." Bobby crammed more green beans into his mouth so that he wouldn't have to say anything more. Todd glared at him. Oh, it took every ounce of Bobby's strength to avoid gagging as the cold and slimy beans slithered down the back of his throat. But he managed. One gag and he'd be seeing the back of Todd's hand flying straight toward his face. "Well, I'm going to need to be up at 3 a.m., said Todd. "Gotta beat the sun. At least that'll give us a few hours of cool air to work. Gotta get to planting out in the fields, fertilize the soil, all that." Bobby nodded obediently. "I'm going to show you how to plant the corn and the soybeans," Todd continued. "In the fall we'll harvest them, but first I gotta show you how to work the trencher." Again, Bobby nodded. He feared that anything he said would sound stupid and piss off Todd. Todd looked back at the clock and followed this by standing up. "Best get to bed," he said. Todd started to walk off, but then stopped and turned around. "Oh, and I don't want to have to wake you up in the morning, got it?" Bobby nodded. "How's that?" Todd asked, rhetorically. "Yes, sir," Bobby quickly replied. "We'll set your alarm, 3 a.m. If it's 3:02 and you're not up, I'm coming in there and making my bell sing, you hear?" "Yes, sir." "And that'll be no way to work the rest of the day with a sore rear end." "Yes, sir." Todd exited the kitchen. Bobby brought his fork to his plate, but quickly realized that he'd eaten the last of his green beans. Todd's anger was a powerful motivator indeed. At around 11 p.m., Bobby awoke with a full bladder. He quickly sat up, counting his lucky stars that he hadn't wet the bed and drawn Todd's wrath. However, just as he was about to lift his feet out from under the covers, Bobby froze as he found himself gazing into the dark vacuum of space that was his closet. His vision was fuzzy from sleep, and so he could see dancing shapes within the darkness of that doorway. For the first few seconds, he could have sworn the shapes he was seeing were really there, but after a moment, even his 9-year-old mind understood that they were just the product of sleepy eyeballs. But then, Bobby began to notice a very distinct shape in the doorway. It was circular in form, very pale in color, and had a slight neon tint. Bobby rubbed his eyes, but the shape still lingered there. He blinked a few times, but still it stayed. Bobby stared at the shape, and then he began to pick up on other features. The shape had 2 pitch-black dots on its surface, and that was when Bobby realized that it was a face. He couldn't quite believe what he was seeing, but it was real. He quickly hunkered back down under his covers, pulling the sheet up to the bridge of his nose. He didn't dare take his eyes off of that face. He feared that if he did, he'd look back to see it right in front of him. A few minutes passed as Bobby continued to stare at the face. He hadn't pulled the covers away from his own face, and now there was a light rug burn on the tip of his nose because of it. The room was so dark that Bobby could not even see the rest of the being's body, just the face. As he continued to watch it, the face's mouth began to slowly move upward in a ghastly grin. Bobby wanted to get out of the bed and run, but there was no way he was mustering up the courage to do that. He'd thought about calling for his uncle several times, but that may have brought problems of its own, either from his uncle's anger or maybe from the thing in his closet. Still, it was starting to seem like a better option than lying there and having that face stare at him all night long. "Uncle Todd?" Bobby stammered out. It came out as a small squeak that was just barely above a whisper. "Uncle Todd!" Bobby yelled this time, and then waited. The face's hideous grin grew wider, as if watching Bobby cry for help gave it some sort of sick satisfaction. "Uncle Todd!" Even on the third try, Bobby could still make out the faint sound of Todd's woodcutter of a snore downstairs. The rest of the night, Bobby drifted in and out of consciousness as that face stared him down. "What the hell is this?" Bobby blinked, and the next thing he knew, it was 3 a.m., and he was looking up at a very angry Todd, who was furiously tossing Bobby's piss-soaked sheets across the room. It wasn't long before Bobby felt Todd's vice-like grip on his wrist. Todd yanked Bobby out of bed and to his feet. Any more force, and Todd would have ripped Bobby's shoulder right out of its socket. Not only do you not wake up when I tell you to, yelled Todd, but then you're absorbing the wound by pissing the bed like an infant. I'm sorry, Bobby shouted. There was a... Bobby's voice drifted off. Todd stared him right in the eye, expectantly waiting for an answer, or better yet, an excuse so he could start hitting Bobby. There was a what? Asked Todd. There was something in my closet, Bobby said hesitantly. Todd grimaced at Bobby for a long moment. He followed this by slapping Bobby right to the floor. Bobby lied on the floor, clutching his face as Todd began walking out of the room. Now get dressed, said Todd. Tonight you're going to have to wash those sheets. Actually, no. You're going to just sleep without sheets. Todd then stormed out of Bobby's bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Bobby immediately forgot about the bruise on his face and glanced over at the closet. Thin streams of daylight seeped into the doorway of the closet now, and Bobby could see that there was nothing there but a worn wall and a bar for clothing hangers. Bobby's day was spent mainly getting screamed at by Todd. Just about everything Bobby did was followed up by an angry barrage of choice words from his uncle. His previous night of interrupted sleep only made matters worse. At times Bobby was shocked simply at the pure longevity of his uncle's anger. And how could somebody be angry this much? That evening Bobby dreaded that walk up the stairs. The creaking of the steps no longer bothered him too much, and neither did the house's smell. All he had time to dread at this point was that face in his closet. He tried to rationalize it himself, hoping and praying that it had just been one of those half-asleep, half-awake hallucinations. He remembered how his dad used to say that, when he himself was little, he would see tiny little fingers moving around in the carpet upon waking in the middle of the night. Still, no matter how much Bobby tried to rationalize it, that face had just looked too real. Bobby made sure to drain his bladder before going to sleep. Well, he had to shut the bathroom door because if you looked closely at the corner of the mirror, you could see one half of that closet. When he left the bathroom, Bobby full-on sprinted over to the bed, leaping into the air and diving onto the mattress. He decided to sleep with the lights on tonight. He could have sworn there was no way in hell he'd fall asleep, especially since he shivered as he lied there, freezing without a blanket. But deprivation set in, and soon Bobby was lights out. Upon waking that morning, Bobby was thankful he hadn't woken in the middle of the night. Granted, Uncle Todd's ascending footfalls were not the most reassuring thing to wake up to in the morning, but anything was better than that ghastly face. As he listened to Todd coming up the stairs, Bobby felt a strong itch on his forearm. As he scratched away at it, the itch began to grow in intensity, and soon it began to burn. Bobby glanced over at his arm, and immediately was filled with unease. On his arm was a thin marking, clearly a bite mark. That much was apparent even to a 9-year-old Bobby. There were 2 distinct markings that were part of a larger bite. The 2 marks looked like they'd already begun to heal, which was strange. Bobby's examination of his odd little bite mark was interrupted by Todd's hasty entrance into his room. Todd knocked on Bobby's already open door, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Let's get," said Todd. Bobby planted corn and soybeans as far away from his uncle as possible. He constantly checked over his shoulder, hoping that senile old man would keep his distance. Every few minutes, after checking to make sure Todd wasn't watching him, Bobby would examine the bite mark on his arm. Oddly enough, it burned and itched even more in the sunlight. The bite was not from any sort of insect. Bobby knew this much. It looked like it had been left from a human mouth. A short time later, Bobby realized that his bite mark was not the only thing that was itching and burning. No, his entire arm felt like it had received the worst sunburn ever known, and yet there was no indication of a burn upon it. The skin on his arm was tan and unburnt, not a tinge of red. Bobby did his best to ignore the burning sensation. Any one complaint would have Todd kicking his ass up and down the field. By 8 o'clock in the morning, ignoring the pain was tough, but doable. Every time Todd would walk off to take a piss or to grab another piece of equipment, Bobby would take it as an opportunity to rest in the shade. Upon doing so, the burning sensation in his arm would cool off a bit. But as the sun rose higher and higher in the sky, so the shaded areas became more and more sparse. Soon Bobby found himself taking refuge in the only shaded spot he could find, a little patch of shadow from the woodshed, which was in direct view of just about anywhere on the farm. "Hey!" Bobby nearly had a heart attack as he heard Todd's voice echo across the fields. He looked over his shoulder to see Todd standing about 100 yards away, one hand on his hip and the other on his forehead to shield his eyes from the sun. He was looking right at Bobby, who was hanging out in the shade, scratching away at the bite mark on his arm. "What the hell are you doing, boy?" Todd continued. Bobby struggled to think of an answer. I have a bite on my arm," Bobby replied. "You're about to have a welt on your arm if you don't get back to it. Little bug bite stopping you from working." Bobby reluctantly stepped back out into the sunlight and continued planting seeds. Uncle Todd was onto him now. He'd be keeping a close eye on Bobby the rest of the day. Bobby was quite sure of that. As the sun rose nearer to its midday position, the burning sensation in Bobby's arm began spreading toward the rest of his body. His skin was on fire now. It was just about unbearable. It was as if he'd been sunburned from head to toe, but again there was not a patch of redness on him. Still, the pain was excruciating, and Bobby wasn't sure how much longer he could bear it. There weren't many things that scared him more than Todd's belt blows, but this pain within his skin was as frightening as it was inexplicable. While the pain atop Bobby's skin grew more and more intense, the bite mark began to ooze and fester, sort of like poison ivy. Bobby had got poison ivy before, but the discomfort that arose from the bite mark was on another level. It itched and burned, and the more he itched it, the more it burned, and the more it burned, the worse it itched. It was a lose-lose situation, especially with Uncle Todd expecting another few hours of work from Bobby. It was about 10:30 when Bobby knew he couldn't go on like this. Some part of him knew that the itching and burning would lessen if he got out of the sun. It was strange and it didn't make sense, but Bobby had realized it through a morning of trial and error. He figured that his uncle, who was now somewhere deep in the cornfield, was a problem best dealt with later. For now the pain was just too much. Bobby would have killed someone just to cease it. He dropped everything and broke into a run for the house. Even the fabric of his shirt brushing against his skin burned like hell. It was the longest jog of his entire life, even though the farmhouse was only a few 100 yards away. Bobby burst inside the house, taking care to close the door quietly so Todd wouldn't hear it. He panted like crazy, wincing from the pain. But just as he had suspected, it quickly began fading away the moment he was back inside. In just 30 seconds, the burning sensation was completely gone, and it was as if it had never been there in the first place. Bobby stared down at his arms with pure confusion. He pressed 2 fingers to one and pulled them away, the standard visual test for a sunburn. Well, there wasn't one. Bobby continued to glance out the window in paranoid fashion. After just a few minutes, his heart sank as he saw Todd angrily pacing the farm, searching for him. Bobby began shifting around, trying to think of what to do next. If he stayed inside, Todd was bound to come looking for him. But he simply couldn't deal with that burning pain, not again. He had to think of something, and fast, because Todd was now on his way toward the house. Bobby ran into the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and poured tap water into it. As he began sipping from the glass, he heard the front door open. "Bobby," Todd shouted in a "so help me if you're in here" manner. Bobby hesitated as he continued to gulp down the water. He pulled the glass away from his lips, making sure his voice reflected that he had just finished drinking water. "In here," he said. "Getting water." The sound of Todd's approaching footsteps followed. He entered the kitchen and stared Bobby down. "Why don't we get you a jug?" said Todd. "Yeah, let's get you a jug. I don't need you passing out on me." Great, thought Bobby as he watched Todd sift through various items in the pantry. He couldn't go outside. He couldn't go back. He just couldn't do it. "Uncle Todd," said Bobby. "What?" Todd immediately replied. My skin's hurting me." "Pardon?" Todd stopped what he was doing and aimed one ear at Bobby. "My skin, it's burning," said Bobby. "Where?" "Everywhere." "You get poison ivy?" "I don't know, but it only hurts when I'm in the sun." Todd backed out of the pantry and approached Bobby, kneeling down on the ground and scrutinizing him. "Well, that don't make sense," said Todd. "It burns so bad," said Bobby. "I can't take it." Todd huffed in irritation, staring down at the ground as he thought of what to do. "Well," said Todd as the wheels inside his head turned, "I guess if you ain't gonna work, then you ain't getting supper, right?" "I guess," Bobby timidly replied. "Now get upstairs. I don't want to see you till tomorrow morning. You better not scratch. It'll make it worse." "Yes, sir." Todd stormed out of the house. Now Bobby was confronted with the idea of once again going upstairs by himself. That bedroom of his had a presence that was beyond ominous. But now Bobby was beginning to realize that the sunlight pouring in through the kitchen window was causing his skin's burn to slowly return. And with that, Bobby began booking it toward the stairs. Part 2. When he entered his bedroom, the first thing he did was shut the blinds on his window. Bobby flipped on the light, keeping a watchful eye on the closet, which looked like a gaping mouth that was ready to devour him. He plopped down on his bed. At the foot was a pile of now clean sheets that thankfully no longer smelled of piss. The burning on his skin faded away once again. Bobby's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. The sounds thoroughly startled him, since he hadn't heard anyone enter the house. He was sure he'd watched his uncle walk outside, so why hadn't he heard him come back in? Bobby braced himself as the footsteps grew nearer. He hunkered down in his bed, rolling over on his side with his back to the door, shutting his eyes and pretending to be asleep. The footsteps halted for a moment or two. Bobby tuned his ears, the sudden silence deafening. What he heard next could best be described as several fingertips making contact with his wooden door, pushing it slightly open. This was followed by more silence, which greatly unsettled Bobby. Curiosity got the best of him, though, and he rolled over to see who was at the door. What he saw next made his heart jump to his throat. Two pitch-black eyeballs peered at him through the doorway. They were attached to that pasty white face he'd seen in his closet 2 nights ago. Bobby was frozen with fear for several moments. The black eyes didn't even blink, and their owner was completely unmoving. Snapping out of his fearful trance, Bobby leapt up and dove for cover on the side of his bed. He propped his back up against the side of the mattress, panting like a winded animal. His wide eyes darted all over the place as he listened for more sounds. There was silence once again. Bobby slowly worked up the nerve to peek over the mattress. And when he did, there were those eyes, still in the same place, staring back at him from the bedroom doorway. Bobby squeaked with fear and hunkered back down behind the bed. A few moments passed, and Bobby heard the sound of his door creaking as that closet creature pushed it open. What followed were its footsteps. Bobby could hear it as it walked across the wooden floor, and he began to pray that it was not on its way to the side of the bed where Bobby was hiding. Though hiding was not quite an accurate description, that thing knew he was there. His forehead beaded with perspiration as the steady rhythm of the creature's footfalls continued. He could see its shadow stretching across the wall next to him. The shadow was humanoid in shape, albeit still ghastly in form. "Please, God," Bobby murmured under his breath. "I love you, God, with all my might. Keep me safe all through the night. I love you, God, with all my might. Keep me safe all through the night." With his eyes closed tightly, Bobby repeated his prayer over and over again until the words exited his mouth so fast that they sounded like they were all one long made-up word. He wasn't sure how many times he'd repeated the phrase or how many minutes had passed, but he soon opened one eye and glanced to the side to see that the shadow was no longer there. It was going to take many more minutes before he had the nerve to peek around the corner of the mattress or to even move a muscle. Minutes passed, and Bobby slowly crawled over to the foot of the bed, cautiously peering around the corner of the mattress. The figure wasn't there. All that was left was the same gaping closet doorway, which Bobby was sure the creature had gone into. He felt cornered. If he went outside, he'd surely be in pain again. If he stayed inside, there was a chance he'd see that creature again. So Bobby did what any other child would have done. He crawled under the bed and hid there. Bobby opened his eyes to darkness. He could feel a stream of drool drizzling from the corner of his mouth and into a little puddle on the hardwood floor that he'd been sleeping on for who knew how long. It was night time now, and Bobby was still hunkered down under his bed, the wooden panels beneath his mattress sandwiching him between the bed and the wood floor. He was unaware of the time, but his heart soon sank as he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. At first, he didn't know which it was, his uncle or the creature, but he soon had his answer when he heard the distinct and disgusting sound of his uncle clearing his throat. Bobby quickly crawled out from under his bed and plopped down on the mattress, rolling over and pretending to be asleep. His bedroom door creaked a bit as Todd pushed it open. Todd whispered. "You asleep?" Bobby didn't answer, and in this moment he became terrified as he hoped to God that Todd wasn't up here for any reason other than simply checking on him. The next thing he heard was the sound of Todd slowly pacing into his room. Oh, God! Bobby braced himself for the worst. He could hear Todd circling around the foot of the bed. But a slight relief set in when Bobby heard the sound of Todd fiddling with the clock on the nightstand. Through squinted eyes, Bobby confirmed that this was what Todd was doing, just checking to make sure the alarm had been set. Bobby knew he'd forgotten to set it, judging by the curses Todd muttered under his breath. Soon, Bobby could hear Todd circling back around the other side of the bed. "All right, now just leave," Bobby silently prayed. "Just leave and go to sleep." The footsteps suddenly ceased, and Bobby silently panicked when he didn't hear Todd walking down the stairs. He was sure of what was going on now. Todd was watching him sleep. Should I fake snore? But then, Bobby feared that it might actually sound fake. He wasn't even quite sure if he snored while he slept. He knew Todd did, and that was the only comforting sound that Todd had ever made. A sound that signaled he was asleep and therefore unable to slap Bobby around. Bobby thanked the heavens when the sound of Todd's footsteps started back up, and then he further thanked the heavens when those footsteps were off, echoing down the stairs and causing that loud squeaking sound. Never had the creaking of stairs been so comforting to Bobby. When he was sure that Uncle Todd was gone, he rolled over and was about to hop out of bed to crawl back under it, the only place he felt safe. But once he rolled over, he found himself not looking up at the ceiling, but into those all too familiar pitch-black eyes of the creature in the closet. Before he could even have time to scream, Bobby's entire body went into a state of paralysis, and the only sound he could utter was a weak little wheezing noise from the back of his throat. All he could do was lie there and stare up into those beady, taxidermy-type eyes. They stared angrily down at him, and his own eyes were magnetized to them. And then, as if inhaling laughing gas, Bobby fell unconscious. Bobby's 3 a.m. alarm woke him that morning. It took a few seconds, but Bobby soon had no trouble recalling what had happened the previous evening. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stay in this house. He didn't even want to reach over and shut off the alarm. That bed was now the only safe haven for him, and even being atop the bed was not ideal. The second Bobby lifted his head, he felt a sharp pain coming from his neck, and excruciating soreness within the tendons of his jugular. He brought his fingertips to the area, but immediately winced upon touching it. He already knew what it was, and it would be hackneyed at this point for him to wonder what it might be. Bobby rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. There on his neck was a massive bite mark, much like a hickey, except for several clear puncture marks that had been made by teeth. It looked mysteriously healed, just like the other one, but Bobby didn't want to know what this one would feel like upon stepping out into the sun. He could only imagine all of the horrendous ways it would burn, crack, ooze, and fester. "Come on, boy, let's get," shouted Todd from the bottom of the stairs. The sun would rise before 7 a.m., so Bobby had 3 hours, more or less, before he simply had to go inside. He already knew what would take place if he stayed in the sun. It was the same sort of bite as the one on his arm, and it would produce the same effect. Of that he was certain. Breakfast that morning was most unsatisfying for Bobby, specifically because he found that he didn't want to eat. He was hungry, but had no desire for the food on the table. He couldn't even force it down this time. It was as if every fiber of his being was rejecting the eggs and toast he'd eaten all his life. He craved something else, but he didn't know what. It drew Todd's wrath, but nonetheless, Bobby simply could not eat it. Bobby kept the most watchful of eyes on the horizon while he worked. At the first solitary ray of sunlight that he saw peeking over the skyline, Bobby was getting out of dodge. The bite hurt bad enough as it was. Sure enough, as 6:30 rolled around, 2 tiny rays of sunshine peeped up over the horizon and shot straight for the bite on Bobby's neck. Almost immediately, the bite mark began to peel and seep with pus. His skin began to feel sunburned again, and he immediately dropped everything and began walking toward the house. He didn't even check to make sure Todd wasn't looking, and evidently Todd was looking, for he soon yelled across the field at Bobby. "Hell you doing, boy?" "Going inside," Bobby said without even turning around. "Boy." Bobby heard the sound of Todd dropping the rake he was holding. "I'm kicking your ass." As Bobby began booking it for the house, he could hear a sickly, crazed chuckle emanating from Todd's mouth. "Oh, man," Todd snickered. "I'll tell you what, boy, you are done." Bobby quickened his pace, running up the doorsteps and bursting into the house. The burning feeling immediately calmed down. He looked through the window and saw Todd eagerly making his way toward the doorsteps. Bobby locked the door. The mere clicking sound of the lock seemed to anger Todd, who broke into a full-fledged sprint up the doorsteps and then began banging on the door like a caged animal. "Open this goddamn door," Todd barked. Bobby shook his head, which made Todd angrier. In a split second, Todd froze and contemplated his next move, and then, in 1 additional second, he ran down the doorsteps and rounded the corner of the house. Bobby began sprinting for the back door. He had to lock it before that bastard got in. If Todd got inside, it was over. Bobby ran and ran, but the sound of the back door opening was enough to send him running back the way he'd come. "You are done, boy." Bobby booked it for the stairs. He thought of going out the front door, but he just couldn't face the sunlight, not again. He ran up the stairs. About halfway up, he looked over his shoulder to see Todd begin his own ascent of the stairs. "Where are you going?" Todd asked maniacally. "Where you gonna go, huh?" Bobby burst into his room and slammed the door shut, locking it just in time. The doorknob began wiggling wildly as Todd tried to open it. "Open this door now. Open it." "Go away," Bobby shouted. "Boy, I'ma kick it down." There was silence for a moment as Todd seemed to be giving Bobby some sort of choice to open the door. But at the heart of it, there really was no choice. Bobby was going to have to face the music. "Alrighty, you little shit." And with that, Todd knocked in the flimsy wooden door with one mule-like kick. He immediately lunged toward Bobby. Bobby hopped up onto the bed and over to the other side. It was now a game of cat and mouse. Todd circled around the foot of the bed, and when he did, Bobby jumped up onto the bed and went to the other side. This repeated several times, but it couldn't last forever. Bobby knew that much. "I can do this all day," Todd exclaimed. Bobby was now on the far side of the room, and he started eyeballing the doorway. Todd was by the corner of his bed at the foot. The second Todd took one step around that corner, Bobby was going to leap for that door. Todd did a little fake lunge, and Bobby almost leapt onto the bed, catching himself at the last minute. Todd did a few more fake lunges, and then stood very still, waiting to see what Bobby would do. Bobby stayed patient, however, and soon Todd rounded the corner and ran for Bobby. Bobby jumped up onto the bed and bounded across the mattress, landing on the wooden floor. But Todd was fast, and he quickly reversed back to the other side of the bed, catching Bobby's shirt. "Gotcha!" Todd yanked Bobby onto the bed. Bobby let out a horrible choking noise as his shirt collar tightened around his neck. Next thing he knew, he was thrown down onto the mattress. He tried to wriggle away, but Todd was too strong. Todd firmly grasped Bobby's ankles and began tugging at his pant legs. "Best don't kick, boy," said Todd. Bobby's eyes widened as Todd began yanking hard at Bobby's pant legs. He knew what happened next. It had happened twice before. "No, stop," Bobby begged, but Todd kept at it. Suddenly, however, Bobby's fear quickly ran dry. He was now seeing red, both in the traditional sense of being angry, but also in a literal sense. A dark, syrupy red. And the next thing he heard, right before blacking out, was the sound of Todd screaming in pain. When Bobby came to, he found himself standing in his bedroom, completely alone. It was almost dark outside now. The sun nearly finished dipping below the horizon. Bobby didn't know what had happened or why he was here by himself, but he felt not a single trace of fear, and so he began descending the stairs. Bobby entered the kitchen, and the first thing he saw was Todd, lying on the table with his throat torn wide open and his voice box hanging out. His skin was jet white, and not a single drop of blood was on the floor below. And as Bobby smacked his lips and moved his tongue around in his mouth, he tasted the strong flavor of blood. Both the tang of the blood and the sight of Todd's corpse made Bobby grin. Feeling a presence behind him, Bobby turned around to see the creature from his closet, looming over him with its pasty white face, razor-like fangs, and black cloak. But this time its presence didn't frighten Bobby in the very least. In fact, nothing frightened him now. And as he took the creature's clawed hand and began walking with it into the darkness, he felt safe and sound, for he would never have to step out into the sunlight again. Dr. Bird, scientific sleuth extraordinaire, goes after a sinister stealer of brains. Stolen Brains by Captain S. P. Meek. "I hope, Carnes," said Dr. Bird, "we get good fishing." "Good fishing? Will you please tell me what you're talking about?" "Well, I'm talking about fishing, my friend. You seen the evening paper?" "No. What's that got to do with it?" Dr. Bird tossed across the table a copy of the Washington Post, folded so as to bring uppermost an item on page 3. Carnes saw his picture staring at him from the center of the page. "What the hell?" he exclaimed as he bent over the paper. With growing astonishment, he read that Operative Carnes of the United States Secret Service had collapsed at his desk that afternoon and had been rushed to Walter Reed Hospital, where the trouble had been diagnosed as a nervous breakdown caused by overwork. There followed a guarded statement from Admiral Clay, the President's personal physician, who had been called into conference by the Army authorities. The Admiral stated that the Chief of Washington District was in no immediate danger, but that a prolonged rest was necessary. The paper gave a glowing tribute to the detective's life and work, stated that he had been given sick leave for an indefinite period, and that he was leaving at once for the fishing lodge of his friend, Dr. Bird of the Bureau of Standards, at Squapan Lake, Maine. Dr. Bird, the article concluded, would accompany and care for his stricken friend. Carnes laid the paper aside with a gasp. "Do you know what this means?" Carnes demanded. "It means, Carnesy, my old friend, that the fishing at Squapan Lake should be good right now, that I feel the need of accurate information on the subject. I didn't want to go alone, so I engineered this outrage on the government, and I'm taking you along for company. Now, for the love of God, look sick from now on until we're clear of Washington. We leave tonight. I already have our tickets and reservations, and all you have to do is collect your tackle and pack your bags for a month or two in the woods, and meet me at the Pennsy station at 6 tonight. There are some people who say there is no Santa Claus," mused Carnes. "If I'd really broken down from overwork, I'd probably have had my pay docked for the time I was absent. But a man with official pull in this man's government wants to go fishing, and hey, presto, the wheels move and the way's clear. Doctor, I will meet you as directed." Good enough," said Dr. Bird. "Oh, by the way, Carnes," he went on as the operative opened the door, "make sure to bring your pistol." Carnes whirled about at these words. "Are we, going on a case?" he asked. "That remains to be seen," replied the doctor. "At all events, bring your pistol. In answer to any questions, we are going fishing. And as a matter of fact, we are, with ourselves as bait. If you have a little time to spare this afternoon, you might drop around to the office of the Post and get them to show you all the amnesia cases they've had stories of during the past 3 months. It'll make interesting reading. No more questions now, my friend. We'll have lots of time to talk things over when we're in the Maine woods." Late the next evening, they left the Bangor and Aroostook train at Mezardis and found a Ford truck waiting for them. Over a rough trail, they were driven for 15 miles, winding up at a log cabin which the doctor announced was his. The truck deposited their belongings and jounced away, and Dr. Bird led the way to the cabin, which proved to be unlocked. He pushed open the door and entered, followed by Carnes. The operative glanced at the occupants of the cabin and stared back in surprise. Seated at a table were 2 figures. The smaller of the two had his back to the entrance, but the larger one was facing them. He rose as they entered, and Carnes rubbed his eyes and reeled weakly against the wall. Before him stood a replica of Dr. Bird. It was the same 6'2" of bone and muscle, the same beetling brows, the same craggy chin, and high forehead surmounted by a shock of unruly black hair. In face and figure, the stranger was a replica of the famous scientist. It was until he glanced at their hands. Dr. Bird's hands were long and slim with tapering fingers, the hands of a thinker and an artist, despite the acid stains which disfigured them but could not hide their beauty. The hands of this double were stained, as were Dr. Bird's, but they were short and thick and indicated more the man of action than the man of thought. The second figure arose and faced them again, and Carnes received another shock. While the likeness was not so striking, there was no doubt that the second man would readily have passed for Carnes himself in a dim light or at a little distance. Dr. Bird burst into laughter at the detective's puzzled face. "Carnes," he said, "get yourself together and then shake hands with Major Trowbridge of the Coast Artillery Corps. It's been said by some people that we look like one another." "Oh, I'm glad to meet you, Major," said Carnes. "The resemblance is positively uncanny. But for your hands, I'd have trouble telling you two apart." And the Major glanced down at his own stubby fingers. "It's unfortunate, but it can't be helped," he said. "Now, Dr. Bird, this is Corporal Askins of my command. It's not as good a second to Mr. Carnes as I am to you, but you said that was less important." "The likeness is plenty good enough," replied the doctor. "He'll probably not be subjected to as close a scrutiny as you will. Hey, did you have any trouble in getting here unobserved?" "None at all, Doctor. Lieutenant Maynard found a good landing field within half a mile here, as you said he would. He had his plane camouflaged, and it's standing by. When do you expect trouble? Well, I have no idea. May come tonight, may come later. Well, personally, I hope that it comes later, so that we can get in a good few days of fishing before anything happens. What do you expect to happen, Doctor? Demanded Carnes. Every time I've asked you anything, you told me to wait until we were in the Maine woods, and, well, here we are now. I read up everything that I could find on amnesia victims during the past 3 months, but, well, it didn't throw much light on the matter to me. How many cases did you find, Carnes? 16. There may have been lots more, but couldn't find any others in the post records. Of course, unless the victim were a local man or someone of prominence, it wouldn't appear. Well, you got most of them at that. So, did any points of similarity strike you as you read them? Well, none except that they were all prominent men and all of them mental workers of high caliber. Well, it didn't seem strange to me because, well, it's the man of high mentality who's most apt to crack. Undoubtedly. But there were some points of similarity which you missed. Hey, where did the attacks take place? Why, one was... Oh, shit. Doctor, I did miss something. Every case, well, as nearly as I can recall, happened at some summer camp or other resort where they were on vacation. Correct. Oh, one other point. What time of day did they occur? In the morning, as well as I can remember. Well, that point didn't register. No, they were discovered in the morning, all of them, Carnes, which means the actual loss of memory occurred during the night. More than that, every case has happened within a circle with a diameter of 300 miles. We're near the northern edge of that circle. Carnes checked through his memory rapidly. God, you're right, Doctor, he cried. Hey, do you think... I do once in a while, replied Dr. Bird dryly. I think enough to know the futility of guesses hazarded without complete data. We're now located within the limits of the amnesia belt, and we're here to find out what happened, if anything, and not to make wild guesses about it. So, you send up the tent for us, Major? Yeah, Doctor. About 30 yards from the cabin and hidden so well that you could pass it a dozen times a day without suspecting its existence. The gas masks and the other equipment you sent to Fort Banks are inside. In that case, we'd better dispense with your company as soon as we've eaten a bite and retire to the tent. Hey, on second thoughts, we'll eat inside it. Carnes, we'll leave at once and leave our substitutes in possession of the cabin. Well, I trust, gentlemen, that things will come out all right and that you're in no danger. Major Trowbridge shrugged his heavy shoulders. Well, let's hope so, he said. It's a matter of duty to me, you know. Thank God I have no family to mourn if anything does go wrong. Neither is Corporal Askins. Well, good luck at any rate. Now, will you guide Carnes to the tent and return here so I can join him? Huddled in the tiny concealed tent, Dr. Bird handed Carnes a haversack on a web strap. This is a gas mask, he says. Put it on your neck and keep it ready for instant use. I have one on, and one of us must wear a mask continually while we're here. We'll change every hour. If the gas used is lethane, as I suspect it is, we should be able to detect it before it gets too concentrated. But some other gas might be used, and we have to take no chances. Right, now look here. With the aid of a flashlight, he showed Carnes a piece of apparatus which had been set up in the tent. It consisted of 2 telescopic barrels, one fitted with an eyepiece and the other, which was at a wide angle to the first, with an objective glass. Between the two was a covered round disc from which projected a short tube fitted with a protecting lens. This tube was parallel to the telescopic barrel, containing the objective lens. This is a new thing that I've developed. It's getting its first practical test tonight, he said. It's a gas detector. Works on the principle of a spectroscope with modifications. From this projector goes out a beam of invisible light, and the reflections are gathered and thrown through a prism of the eyepiece. While a spectroscope requires that the substance which it examines be incandescent and throw out visible light rays in order to show the typical spectral lines, well, this device catches the invisible ultraviolet on a fluorescent screen and analyzes it spectroscopically. Whoever has the mask on must continually search the sky with it and look for the 3 bright lines which characterize lethane, one at 230, one at 240, and the third at 670 on the illuminated scale. Look, if you see any bright lines in those regions or any other lines that are not continually present, you call for me at once. Right, I'll watch for the first hour. At the end of an hour, Dr. Bird removed his mask with a sigh of relief, and Carnes took his place at the spectroscope. For half an hour he moved the glass about, and then spoke in a guarded tone. "I don't see any of the lines you told me to look for," he said. "But in the southwest I get a wide band at 310. Oh, and 2 lines at about 520. Dr. Bird advanced toward the instrument, but before he reached it, Carnes gave out a cry. "Damn, there they are, Doctor." Dr. Bird sniffed the air. A faint sweetish odor became apparent, and he reached for his gas mask. Slowly his hands dropped, and Carnes grasped him and drew the mask over his face. Dr. Bird rallied slightly and feebly drew a bottle from his pocket and sniffed it. In another instant he was shouldering Carnes aside and staring through the spectroscope. Carnes watched him for an instant, and then a low whirring noise attracted his attention, and he looked up. Silently he caught the doctor's arm in a vice-like grip and pointed. Hovering above the cabin was a silvery globe, faintly luminous in the moonlight. From its top rose a faint cloud of vapor which circled around the globe and descended toward the earth. The globe hovered like a drone above the cabin, and Carnes barely stifled his emotions. The door of the cabin opened, and Major Trowbridge, walking stiffly and like a man in a dream, suddenly appeared. Slowly he advanced for 10 yards, and then stood motionless. The globe drone moved over him, and the bottom unfolded like a flower. 2 long arms shot silently down and grasped the motionless figure, and drew him up into the heart of the globe. The petals refolded, and silently as a dream, the globe shot upward and disappeared. "Damn, they lost no time taking him," commented Dr. Bird. "Come on, Carnes. Run for your life, or rather, for Trowbridge's life. No, you idiot. Leave your gas mask on. Look, I'll take the spectroscope. That's all we're going to need." Followed by the panting Carnes, Dr. Bird sped through the night along an almost invisible path. For half a mile he kept up his pace, until Carnes could feel his heart pounding as though it would burst his ribs. The pair then left the tree line and went into a glade a few acres in extent, and Dr. Bird paused and whistled softly. An answering whistle came from a few yards away, and a figure rose in the darkness as they approached. "Maynard," called Dr. Bird. "Ah, good enough. I was afraid you might not have kept your gas mask on." "My orders were to keep it on, sir," replied the lieutenant in muffled tones through his mask. "But my assistant did not obey orders. He passed out cold without any warning about 15 minutes ago." "Right, where's your ship?" "Right over here, sir." "Okay, we'll take off at once. Your craft is equipped with a bird silencer?" "Yes, sir." "Right, come on, Carnes. We're going to follow that globe. You take the front cockpit alone. Maynard, Carnes and I will get in the rear with the spec and guide you. You can take off your gas mask at an elevation of 1,000 feet. You do have parachutes, don't you?" "Yep, in the rear, Doctor." "Okay, put one on, Carnes, and climb in. I've got to get this spec set up before it gets too high." The aircraft, equipped with the bird silencer, took the air noiselessly and rapidly gained elevation under the urging of the pilot. Dr. Bird clamped the gas-detecting spectroscope on the front of his cockpit and peered through it. "Right, southwest. About 1,000 more elevation," he directed. "Right," replied the pilot as he turned the nose of his plane in the indicated direction and began to climb. For an hour and a half, the plane flew noiselessly through the night. "Bald Mountain," said the pilot, pointing. "Canadian border's only a few miles away." "God, if they've crossed the border, we're sunk," replied the doctor. "The trail leads straight ahead." Part 2. For a few minutes they continued their flight toward the Canadian border, and then Dr. Bird spoke. "Right, swing south," he directed. "Drop 1,000 feet and come back." The pilot executed the maneuver, and Dr. Bird peered over the edge of the plane and directed the spectroscope toward the ground. "Okay, half a mile east," he said. "Then drop another 1,000. Carnes, get ready to jump when I give the word." "Oh, God," groaned Carnes as he fumbled for the ripcord of his parachute. "Suppose this thing doesn't open?" "Well, they'll slide you between two barn doors for a coffin and bury you that way," said Dr. Bird grimly. "You know your orders, Maynard?" "Yes, sir." "When you drop, I'm to land at the nearest town. It'll be Lowell. And get in touch with the commandant of the Portsmouth Navy Yard if possible. If I get him, I'm to tell him my location and wait for the arrival of reinforcements. If I fail to get him on the phone, I'm to deliver a sealed packet which I carry to the nearest United States Marshal. When reinforcements arrive, either from the Navy Yard or from the Marshal, I'm to guide them toward the spot where I dropped you, and remain, as nearly as I can judge, 2 miles away until I get a further signal or orders from you." "Okay, that's right. We'll be over the edge in another minute. You ready, Carnes?" "Oh, yeah, I'm ready, Doctor. If I have to risk my precious life in this contraption." "Good. Then jump." Side by side, Carnes and the doctor dropped toward the ground. The plane flew silently away into the night. Carnes found that the sensation of falling was not an unpleasant one as soon as he got accustomed to it. There was little sensation of motion. It wasn't until a sharp whisper from Dr. Berg called it to his attention that he realized he was almost at the ground. He bent his legs as he'd been instructed and landed without any great force. As he rose, he saw that Dr. Bird was already on his feet and was eagerly searching the ground for the spectroscope which he'd brought with him in the jump. "Right, fold up your parachute, Carnes. We'll store them under a rock where they can't be seen. We won't need to use them again." Carnes did so and deposited the silk bundle beside the doctor's, and they covered them with rocks until they'd be invisible from the air. "Now, follow me," said the doctor, as he strode carefully forward, stopping now and then to take a sight with the spectroscope. Carnes followed him as he made his way up a small hill which blocked the way. A hiss from Dr. Bird stopped him. The doctor had dropped flat on the ground, and Carnes, on all fours, crawled forward to join him. He smothered a cry as he looked over the crest of the hill. Before him, sitting in a hollow in the ground, was the huge globe drone which had spirited away Major Trowbridge. "Well, this is evidently their landing place," whispered Dr. Bird. "The next thing to find is their hiding place." He rose and started forward, but sank at once to the ground and dragged Carnes down with him. On the hill which formed the opposite side of the hollow, a line of light showed for an instant, as though a door had been opened. The light disappeared and then reappeared, and as they watched, it widened, and against an illuminated background 4 men appeared, carrying a 5th. The door shut behind them, and they made their way slowly toward the waiting globe. They laid down their burden, and one of them turned a flashlight on the globe and opened its door to the side through which they hoisted their burden. They all entered the globe drone. The door closed. With a slight whirring sound, it rose in the air and moved rapidly toward the northeast. "Right, that's the place we're looking for," muttered Dr. Bird. "We'll go around this hollow and look for it. Now be careful where you step. They must have ventilation somewhere if the laboratory's underground." Followed by the Secret Service operative, the doctor made his way along the edge of the hollow. They didn't dare use a torch, and it was slow work feeling their way forward, inch by inch. When they'd reached a point above where the doctor thought the light had been, he paused. Right there must be a ventilation shaft somewhere around here, he whispered, his mouth not an inch from Carnes' ear. We've got to find it. It'd never do to try the door. If any of them are still here, it's sure to be guarded. Right, you go up on the hill for 5 yards and I'll go down. We'll move back and forth on a 200-yard front and work carefully. Just don't fall in whatever you do. We'll return to this point every time we pass it and report. The operative nodded and walked a few yards up the hill and made his way slowly forward. He went 100 yards as nearly as he could judge and then stepped 5 yards further up the hill and made his way back. As he passed the starting point, he approached, and Dr. Bird's figure rose up. "Any luck?" he whispered. Dr. Bird shook his head. "Well, we'll try again," he said. "I think it's probably beyond us, so you go up another 15 yards, and we'll do the same as before." Carnes nodded, and they moved silently away. 15 yards up the hill he went, and then paused. He stood on the crest of the hill, and before him was a steep, almost precipitous slope. He made his way along the edge for a few yards, and then paused. Faintly you could detect a murmur of voices. So inch by inch he crept forward, going over the ground underfoot. He paused and listened intently, and decided that the sound must be coming from the slope beneath him. A glance at his watch told him that he'd spent 10 minutes on this trip, and he made his way back to the meeting place. Dr. Bird was waiting for him, and in a low whisper, Carnes reported his discovery. The doctor then went back with him, and together they renewed the search. The slope of the hill was almost sheer, and Carnes looked dubiously over the edge. "Damn, I wish we'd brought those parachutes," he whispered to the doctor. "We could have taken the ropes off him, and he could have lowered me over the edge." Dr. Bird chuckled softly and tugged at his middle. Carnes watched him with astonishment in the dim light, but he understood when Dr. Bird thrust the end of a strong but light silk cord into his hands. He looped it under his arms, and the doctor, with whispered instructions, lowered him over the cliff. The doctor lowered him gently for a few feet, and then stopped in response to a jerk on the free end. A moment later, Carnes signaled to be drawn up, and was soon standing beside the doctor. "Right, that's the place all right," he whispered. "The whole cliff is covered with creepers, and there's a tree growing right close to it. If we anchor the cord there, I think we can slide down to a safe hold on the tree." Well, the tree did indeed stand near, and the silk cord was soon fastened. Carnes disappeared over the cliff, and in a few moments Dr. Bird slid down the cord to join him. He found the detective seated in a crotch of the tree, only a few feet from the face of the cliff. From the cliff came a pronounced murmur of voices. Dr. Bird drew in his breath in excitement and moved forward along the branch. He touched the stone, and after a moment of searching, he cautiously raised one corner of a painted canvas flap and peered into the cliff. He watched for a few seconds and then slid back and silently pulled Carnes towards him. Together the two men made their way forward to the cliff, and Dr. Bird raised the corner of the flap, and they peered into the hill. Before them was a cave fitted up as a cross between a laboratory and a hospital. Almost directly opposite them, and at the left of a door in the farther wall, was a ray machine of some sort. It was a puzzle to Carnes, and even to Dr. Bird. Although he could grasp the principle at a glance, he was at a loss to divine its use. From a set of coils attached to a generator was connected a tube of the Crookes tube type, with the rays from it gathered and thrown by a parabolic reflector onto the surface where a man's head would rest when he was seated in a white metal chair with rubber-insulated feet, which stood beneath it. An operating table occupied the other side of the room, while a gas cylinder and other common hospital apparatus stood around ready for use. Seated at a table which occupied the center of the room were 3 men. The sound of their voices rose from an indistinct murmur to audibility as the flap was raised, and the watchers could readily understand their words now. 2 of them sat with their faces toward the main entrance, and the 3rd man faced them. Carnes bit his lip as he looked at the man at the head of the table. He was twisted and misshapen in body, a grotesque dwarf with a hunched back, not over 4 feet in height. His massive head, sunken between his hunched shoulders, showed a tremendous dome of cranium and a brow wider and even higher than Dr. Bird's. The rest of his face was lined and drawn, as though by years of acute suffering. Sharp black eyes glared brightly from deep sunken caverns. The dwarf was entirely bald. Even the bushy eyebrows, which would be expected from his face, were missing. "They ought to be getting back," said the dwarf sharply. "If they get back at all," said one of the 2 figures facing him. "What do you mean?" growled the dwarf, his eyes glittering ominously. "They are return, all right. They know they'd better." "Well, they'll return if they can. But I tell you again, Slavatsky, I think it was a piece of foolishness to try to take 2 men in one night. Well, we got Bird all right, but he's getting late for a second one, and they had to bring Bird over 100 miles and then go nearly 300 more for Williams. The news about Bird may have been discovered and spread, and others may be looking for us. Even Carnes might have recovered." "Didn't he get a full dose of lethane?" "So Frick says, and Bird certainly had a full dose. But I can't help but feel uneasy. Our operations were going too nicely on schedule. God, you had to break it up and take on an extra case in the same night as a scheduled one. I'm telling you, I don't like it." "Well, I'm sorry that I did it, Carson. Only because the results were so poor. We'd planned on Williams for a month, and I wanted him. Bird was so easy that I couldn't resist it." "What did you get?" "Not as much menthium as would have come from an ordinary bookkeeper." "Well, I'll admit that Bird is a grossly overrated man. He must have relied on sheer luck in his work in the past. And there was nothing in his brain to show it above average. We barely got enough menthium to replace what we used in capturing him." "Damn, we ought to have taken Carnes and left Bird alone," snorted Carson. "Even a wooded-headed detective ought to have given us a better supply than Bird yielded." "Well, we're bound to meet with disappointments once in a while. I'd marked Bird down long ago as soon as I could get a chance at him." "Well, you got to run that show, Slavatsky. But I'm warning you, we're not going to let you pull off another one like it. I don't take any more crazy chances, even on your orders." The hunchback then rose to his feet, his eyes glittering ominously. "What do you mean, Carson?" he said slowly, his hands slipping behind him as he spoke. "Don't you try any of that rough stuff, Slavatsky," warned Carson sharply. "I can pull a gun as fast as you can. I'll do it if I have to." Gentlemen, protested the 3rd man, rising. "We're all too deep into this to quarrel. Sit down and let's talk this over. Yeah, Carson's just worried." "What is there to be worried about?" grunted the dwarf as he slid back into his chair. "Everything has gone nicely so far, and no suspicion has been raised." "Well, maybe it has, and then, again, maybe it hasn't," growled Carson. "I think this Bird episode tonight looks bad. In the first place, it came too opportunely and too easily. In the second place, Bird should have yielded more menthium. In the third place, hey, did you notice his hands? They weren't the type of hands to expect on a man of his type." "Oh, nonsense. They were acid-stained, like a scientist should be." "Well, acid stains can be put on. May all be all right, but I'm worried, I tell you. While we're talking about this matter, there's another thing I want cleared up." "What is it?" "Well, I think, Slavatsky, that you're holding out on us. You're getting more than your share of the menthium." And again the dwarf leaped to his feet, but the peacemaker intervened. "Carson has a right to look at the records, Slavatsky," he said. "Well, I'm satisfied, but I'd like to look at them too. Look, none of us have seen him for 2 months now." The dwarf glared first at one and then the other. "All right," he said shortly, and limped to a cabinet on the wall. He drew a key from his pocket and opened it and pulled out a leather-bound book. "Look all you please. I was supposed to get the most. It was my idea, after all. Well, you were to get 1.5 shares, while Willis, Frank, and I got 1 share each, and the rest half a share, said Carson. I know how much has been given. It won't take me but a minute to check up. He bent over the book then, but Willis interrupted. I just better put it away, Carson, he said. Here come the rest, and we don't want them to know we suspect anything. He pointed toward a disc on the wall which had begun to glow. Slavatsky looked at it and grasped the book from Carson and replaced it in the cabinet. He moved over and started the generator, and the tube began to glow with a violet light. A noise came from the outside, and the door opened. 4 men entered, carrying a fifth, whom they propped up in the chair under the glowing tube. Everything go all right? Asked the dwarf eagerly. Smooth as silk, replied one of the 4. Well, I hope we get some results this time. The dwarf bent over the ray apparatus and made some adjustments, and the head of the unconscious man was bathed with a violet glow. For 3 minutes, the flood of light poured on his head. Then the dwarf shut off the light, and Carson and Willis lifted the figure and laid it on the operating table. The dwarf bent over the man and inserted the needle of a hypodermic syringe into the back of his neck at the base of the brain. The needle was an extremely long one, and Dr. Berg gasped as he saw 4 inches of shining steel buried into the brain of this unconscious man. Slowly, Slavatsky drew back the plunger of the syringe, and Dr. Berg could see it was being filled with an amber fluid. For 2 minutes this slow work continued, until a speck of red appeared in the glass syringe barrel. 7.5 cubic centimeters, cried the dwarf in a tone of delight. Damn, cried Carson. That's a record, isn't it? Oh no, we got 8 once. Now, hold him carefully while I return some of it. Slavatsky slowly pressed home the plunger, and a portion of the amber fluid was returned to the patient's skull. Then he withdrew the needle and straightened up and held it toward the light. 6 centimeters net, he announced. I'll take him back, Frank. I'll give Carson and Willis their share now, and we'll take care of the rest of you when you return. Is the ship well stocked? Enough for 2 or 3 more trips. Well, in that case, I'll inject this whole lot. Better get going, Frank. It's pretty late. The 4 men who'd brought the patient in stepped forward and lifted him from the table and dragged him out. Dr. Bird dropped the canvas screen and strained his ears. A faint whir told him that the globe drone had taken to the air. He slid back along the limb of the tree until he touched the rope and silently climbed over until he returned to the top of the hill. He then tried to call to Carnes, and the operative soon stood beside him on the ledge surmounting the cliff. What on earth were they doing? Asked Carnes in a whisper. That was Professor Williams of Yale. They were depriving him of his memory. There'll be another amnesia case in the papers tomorrow. Listen, I haven't got time to explain their methods now, but we've got to act. Hey, you have a flashlight? Yeah, and my gun. Are we going to break in? Look, there are only 3 of them. I think we could handle the lot. Yeah, but the others may return at any time. We want to bag the whole lot of them. They've done their damage for tonight. But you heard my orders to Lieutenant Maynard, didn't you? Yeah? He should be somewhere in these hills to the south with assistance of some sort. The signal to them is 3 long flashes, followed in turn by 3 short ones, then 3 more long. Go and find them and bring them here. When you get close, give me the same light signal, and don't try to break in unless I'm with you. I'm going to do some more recon and make sure there's no back entrance through which they can escape. Well, good luck, Hines, and hurry while you can. There's no time to be lost. Part 3. The Secret Service operative stole away into the night, and Dr. Berg climbed back down the rope and took his place at the window. Willis lay on the operating table unconscious, while Slavatsky and Carson studied the now partially emptied syringe. you gave him his full share, all right," Carson was saying. "Guess you're playing with us. Well, I'll take mine now." He lay down on the operating table, and the dwarf fitted an anesthesia cone over his face and opened the valve of the gas cylinder. Then he closed it and rolled the unconscious man on his face and deftly inserted the long needle. Instead of injecting a portion of the contents of the syringe as Dr. Bird had expected him to do, he drew back on the plunger for a minute and then took out the needle and held the syringe to the light. "Well, Mr. Carson," he said with a malignant glance at the unconscious figure, "that recovers the dose you got a couple of weeks ago while Willis washed me. I don't think you really need any menthium. Your brain's too active to suit me as it is." He gave an evil chuckle and walked to the far side of the cave and opened a secret panel. He drew from a recess a flask and carefully emptied a portion of the contents of the syringe into it. He replaced the flask and closed the panel, and with another chuckle he limped over to a chair and threw himself down into it. For an hour he sat motionless, and Dr. Bird carefully worked his way back along the branch and climbed the rope and started for the hollow. A faint whirring noise attracted his attention, and he could see the faintly luminous globe drone in the distance, rapidly approaching. It came to a stop at the spot where it had previously landed, and 4 men got out. Instead of going toward the cave, they towed the globe, which floated a few inches from the earth, toward the side of the hill farthest from where the doctor stood. 3 of them held it, while the 4th went forward and bent over some controls on the ground. A creaking sound came through the night, and the men moved forward with the globe. Presently its movement stopped, and the men reappeared. Again came the creaking sound, and the globe faded out, as though a screen had been drawn in front of it. The 4 men then walked toward the door of the cave. Dr. Bird dropped flat on the ground and saw them pause a few yards below him on the hill, and again work some hidden controls. A glare of light showed for an instant, and they disappeared, and everything again went quiet. Dr. Bird debated the advisability of returning to the window, but decided against it and moved down the face of the hill. Inch by inch he went over the ground, but found nothing. In the darkness he could not locate the door, and he made his way around the back of the hill. The precipice loomed above him, and he swept it with his gaze, but he couldn't locate an opening in the darkness. He dared not use his flashlight. As he turned, he faced the east and noticed with a start of surprise that the sky was getting red. He glanced at his watch and realized that Carnes had been gone for nearly 3 hours. "God damn," he exclaimed in surprise. "Time's gone faster than I realized. He ought to be back at any time now." He mounted the highest point of the hill and sent 3 long flashes, followed in turn by 3 short and then 3 more long to the south, and watched eagerly for an answer. He waited 5 minutes and repeated the signal, but no answering flashes came from the empty hills. With a grunt which might have meant anything, he turned and made his way toward the opposite side of the hollow where the globe had disappeared. Here he met with more luck. He marked the location with extreme care, and he had not spent over 20 minutes feeling over the ground before his hand encountered a bit of metal. As he pulled on it, his eyes sought the side of the hill. The dawn had grown sufficiently bright for him to see the result of his actions. A portion of the hill folded back, and the faintly glowing ship became visible. With a muttered exclamation of triumph, he approached it. The globe was about 9 feet in diameter, and was without visible doors or windows. Around and around it the doctor went, searching for an entrance. The ship now rested solidly on the ground. Well, he failed to find what he was looking for, and his hands began to go over it, searching for an irregularity. He covered nearly half of it before his finger found a hidden button, so he pressed it. Silently a door in the side of the craft opened, and he advanced to enter. "You, hands up," said a sharp voice behind him. Dr. Bird froze in an instant, and the voice spoke again. "Now, turn around." Dr. Bird turned and looked full into the eye of a revolver held by the man the dwarf had addressed as Frink. Behind Frink stood the dwarf and 3 other men. As his eye fell on Dr. Bird, Frink turned momentarily pale and staggered back, the revolver wavering as he did so. In that instant, Dr. Bird made a lightning grab for his own weapon, but before he could draw it, Frink had recovered and the revolver was again steady. "What? Dr. Bird?" gasped Slavatsky. "That's impossible." "Get his gun, Harris," said Frink. One of the men stepped forward and dexterously removed the doctor's automatic and frisked him expertly to ensure himself that he had no other weapon concealed. "Bring him to the cave," directed Slavatsky, who, though obviously still shaken, had just as obviously recovered enough to be a very dangerous man. Two of the men grasped the doctor and led him along toward the entrance of the laboratory, which stood wide open in the gathering daylight. Frink paused long enough to shut the side of the hill and conceal the ship, and then followed the doctor. In the cave, the door was shut, and the doctor placed against the wall under the window through which he had peered earlier in the night. Slavatsky took his seat at the table, his malignant black eyes boring into the doctor. Carson and Willis sat on the edge of the operating table, evidently still partially under the effects of the anesthetic that had been administered to them. "How did you get back here?" demanded Slavatsky. "You work it out," snapped Dr. Bird. The dwarf then rose threateningly. "You speak respectfully to me, for I am the master of the world," he roared in an angry voice. "Answer my questions when I speak, or means will be found to make you answer. Now, how did you get back here?" Dr. Bird maintained a stubborn silence, his fierce eyes answering the dwarf's look for look, and his prominent chin jutting out a little more squarely. It was Carson who suddenly broke the silence. "Hey, that's not the Bird we had here earlier," he cried as he staggered to his feet. "What do you mean?" demanded Slavatsky, whirling around on him. "Look at his hands," replied Carson, pointing. Slavatsky looked at Dr. Bird's long, mobile fingers, and an evil leer came over his face. "So then, Dr. Bird," he said slowly, "you thought to match wits with Ivan Slavatsky, the greatest mind of all the ages. Well, for a time you fooled me when your double was operated on here, but not for long. I presume you thought that we had no way of detecting the substitution. You've discovered differently. Now, where's your friend, Mr. Carnes? Didn't your men leave him in the cabin when you kidnapped me?" Slavatsky looked at Frink inquiringly. "Well, he stayed in the cabin, if he was in it when we got there," the leader of the kidnapping gang replied. "He got a full shot of lethane, and he's due to be asleep still. I don't know how this man recovered. God, I left him there myself." "You fool," shrieked Slavatsky. "You brought me a dummy whom I wasted my time in operating on. Was the other one a dummy too?" "I didn't enter the cabin." Slavatsky shrugged his shoulders. "If that's all the good the menthium I've injected has done you, I might as well have saved it. It doesn't matter, though. We have the one we wanted now. Well, Dr. Bird, it was very thoughtful of you to come here and offer your marvelous brain to strengthen mine. I have no doubt that you will yield even more menthium than Professor Williams did this evening, especially as I will extract your entire supply and reduce you to permanent idiocy. I will have no mercy on you as I have on the others I've operated on." Dr. Bird held strong, in spite of himself, at these ominous words. "You have the whip hand for the moment, Slavatsky, but my time may come, and if it does, I will remember your kindness. I saw your operation on Professor Williams this evening. I know your power. I also know that you stole the idea and the method from Zweigart of Vienna. I saw you inject the fluid you drew into Willis's brain. Shall I tell what else I saw?" There was a look of shock in the dwarf's eyes, just for a moment, but he recovered himself quickly. "Into the chair with him," he roared. 3 of the men grasped the doctor and forced him into the chair, and Slavatsky started the generator. The violet light bathed Dr. Bird's head, and he felt a stiffness and contraction of his neck muscles, and as he tried to shout out his knowledge of Slavatsky's treachery, he found that his vocal cords were paralyzed. Through a gathering haze, he could see Carson approaching with an anesthesia cone, and the sweet smell of lethane assailed his nostrils. He fought with all his force, but strong hands held him, and he felt himself slipping, and then falling into an immense void. His head slumped forward on his chest, and Slavatsky shut off the generator. "Now, on the table," he said. The 4 men picked up the Herculean frame of the unconscious doctor and hoisted him up on the table. Carson seized his head and bent it forward, and the dwarf took from a case a syringe with a 5-inch needle. He touched the point of it to the base of the doctor's brain. Part 4. "Wait, Slavatsky, look over there!" cried Frink. With an exclamation of impatience, the dwarf turned and stared at a disc set on the wall of the cave. It was glowing brightly. With a quick move, he dropped the syringe and snapped a switch, plunging the whole cave into darkness. A tiny panel in the door opened to his touch, and he stared out into the light. "Oh, soldiers!" he gasped. "Quick, out the back way." As he spoke, there came a sound as of a heavy body falling at the back of the cave. Slavatsky turned the switch and flooded the cave with light once more. At the back of the cave stood Operative Carnes, an automatic pistol in his hand. "Open the main door," Carnes snapped. Slavatsky made a move toward the light, and Carnes' gun roared deafeningly in the confined space. The heavy bullet smashed into the wall an inch from the dwarf's hand, and he stared back. "Now open the main door," ordered Carnes once again. The men stared at one another for a moment, and the dwarf's eyes fell. "Open the door, Frink," he said. Frink moved over to a lever. He glanced back at Slavatsky, and a momentary gleam of intelligence passed between them. Frink raised his hand toward the lever, and Carnes' gun roared again, and Frink's arm fell limp from a smashed shoulder. "Now, Slavatsky," said Carnes sternly, "come over here." Slowly the dwarf approached. "Now, turn around," said Carnes. He turned and felt the cold muzzle of Carnes' gun against the back of his neck. "Now tell one of your men to open the door," said the detective. "If he promptly obeys your order, you are safe. If he doesn't, you die." Slavatsky hesitated for a moment, but the cold muzzle of the automatic bored into the back of his neck, and when he spoke, it was in a quavering whine. "Oh, open the door, Carson," he whimpered. There was a moment of pause. "If that door isn't open by the time I count 3, said Carnes. "As far as Slavatsky is concerned, it's just too bad. Well, I'll have 4 shots left, and I'm a dead shot at this range. 1, 2. His lips framed the word 3, and his fingers were tightening on the trigger when Carson jumped forward and pulled the lever on the wall, and the door swung open. Carnes shouted an order, and through the open door came half a dozen Marines, followed by an officer. "Now, tie these men up," snapped Carnes. In almost an instant, the 6 men were securely bound, and Frink's bleeding shoulder was being skillfully treated by 2 of the Marines. Carnes then turned his attention to the unconscious doctor. He rolled him over on his back and began to chafe his hands. An officer in a naval uniform came through the door, and with a swift glance around, bent over Dr. Bird. He raised one of the doctor's eyelids and peered closely at his eye, and then sniffed at his breath. "It's some anesthetic I don't know," he said. I'll try a stimulant. He reached in his pocket for a hypodermic, but Carnes interrupted him. Earlier in the evening, Dr. Bird said they were using lethane, he said. Oh, that new gas the Chemical Warfare Service has discovered, said the surgeon. In that case, I guess it'll just have to wear off. I know of nothing that'll neutralize it. Without replying, Carnes began to feverishly search the pockets of the unconscious scientist. With an exclamation of triumph, he drew out a bottle and uncorked it. A strong smell of garlic penetrated the room, and he held the open bottle under Dr. Bird's nose. The doctor lay for a moment without movement, and then he coughed and sat up, half strangled with tears running down his face. Take that confounded bottle away, Carnes, he said. Do you want to strangle me? He sat up and looked around. Hey, what happened? He demanded. Oh, yeah, I remember now. That brute was about to operate on me. How did you get here? Never mind that, Doctor. Are you all right? I'm fine. Hey, how did you get here so quickly? Well, I was a little slow in locating Lieutenant Maynard and the Marines. When we got here, I was afraid that we couldn't find the door. So I took Maynard and a detail around to the back, and I went up to the top and slid down our cord and looked in the window. You were unconscious, and Slavatsky was bending over you with a needle in his hand. I was about to try a shot at him, when something called their attention to the men in front, and I squeezed through the window and dropped in on them. They didn't seem too glad to see me, but I overlooked that and insisted on inviting the rest of my friends in here to share in the party. And that's all. Carnes, said the doctor, you're probably lying like a trooper when you make out that you did nothing. But I'll get the truth out of you sooner or later. But for now, I've got to get back to work. Send for Lieutenant Maynard. One of the Marines went out to get him, and Dr. Bird stepped to the cabinet from which Slavatsky had taken his record book earlier in the evening and took out the leather-bound volume. He opened it and started to read when Lieutenant Maynard entered the cave. Hello, Maynard, said the doctor, looking up. Are the rest of the party on their way? Well, they'll be here in less than 2 hours, Doctor. Good enough. We'll have someone sent to guide them here. In the meantime, I'm going to study these records. I'll keep the prisoners quiet. If they make a noise, gag them. I need to concentrate. So for an hour and a half, silence reigned in the cave. A stir was heard outside, and Admiral Clay, the President's personal physician, entered, leading a stout grey-haired man. Dr. Bird whistled when he saw them and leaped to his feet as another figure followed the Admiral. God, it's the President, gasped Carnes as the officers came to a salute and the Marines presented arms. The President nodded to his ex-guard, acknowledged the salute of the rest, and turned to Dr. Bird. Have you met with success, Doctor? He asked. I have, Mr. President, or rather I hope that I have. But at the same time, well, I'd rather experiment on some other victim of their devilry than the one you've brought me. My decision that the one I brought shall be the first to be experimented on, as you term it, is unalterable. Dr. Bird bowed and turned to the dwarf, who had been a sullen witness of what had gone on. Slavatsky, he said slowly, your game is up. I've witnessed one of your brain transfusions, and I know the method. I gather from your notes that the menthium you've hidden in that cabinet is still as potent as when it was first extracted from a living brain. But in this case, I'm going to draw it fresh from one of your gang. Some of the details of the operation are a little hazy to me, but those you will teach me. I'm going to restore this man to the condition he was in before you did your devil's work on him, and you'll direct my movements. Now, just what is the first step in removing the menthium from a brain? Well, the dwarf maintained a stubborn silence. You refuse to answer? Asked the doctor in feigned surprise. Well, I thought that you'd rather instruct me and have me try the operation first on other men. Well, since you prefer that I operate on you first, I'll be glad to do so. He stepped to the opposite wall, and in a few moments had opened the dwarf's hiding place and taken out a flask of menthium. Carson, he said, after you'd watched Slavatsky inject menthium into Willis, you took lethane and expected him to inject menthium into your brain. Well, instead of doing so, he withdrew a portion from your brain and put it in this flask. I have reason to believe from his secret records that I found in the cabinet with this flask that he has done so regularly. Are you willing to instruct me while I remove the menthium from him?" "You dirty swine," shouted Carson. "I'll do anything to get even with him, but I've never performed the operation. Only Slavatsky and Willis have operated." "Well, will you help me, Willis?" asked Dr. Bird. "Yeah, I'll be glad to, Doctor. God, I'm sick of this business anyway. At first, Slavatsky just planned to give us abnormally keen brains, but lately he's been talking of setting himself up as Emperor of the world. God, I'm sick of it. I think I would have broken with him and told you all I know anyway." "Right, throw him into that chair," said Dr. Bird. Despite the howlings and strugglings of the dwarf, 3 of the Marines strapped him in the chair beneath the tube. The dwarf howled and frothed at the mouth and directed a final appeal for mercy to the President. "Spare me, President, spare me," he howled. "I'll put my brains at your service and make you the greatest mentality of all time. Together we can conquer and rule the whole world. I'll show you how to build hundreds of ships like mine." The President turned his back on the dwarf and spoke curtly. "Proceed with your experiments, Dr. Bird," he said. Slavatsky directed his appeals to the doctor, who peremptorily silenced him. "I told you a few hours ago, Slavatsky, that the time might come when I would remember your threats against me. I'll show you the same mercy now as you promised me then. Carnes, put a cone over his face." Despite the howls of the dwarf, the operative forced an anesthesia cone over his face, and Dr. Byrne turned to the valve of the lethane cylinder. With Willis directing his movements, he turned on the ray for 3 minutes and removed the unconscious dwarf to the operating table. He took the long needle syringe from a case and sterilized it, and then turned to the President. "I'm about to operate," he said. "But before I do, I wish to explain to all just what I've learned and what I'm about to do. With the data, the decision of whether I shall proceed will rest with you and Admiral Clay. Have I your permission to do so?" The President nodded. "When I first read of these amnesia cases, I took them for coincidences, until you consulted me and gave me an opportunity to examine one of the victims. I found a small puncture at the base of the brain which I couldn't explain, and I began to dig into old records. Well, I knew, of course, of Zweigert of Vienna, and the extravagant claims he had put forward back in the day. He was far ahead of his time, but he mixed up some profound scientific discoveries with mysticism and occultism, until he was discredited. Nevertheless, he continued his experiments with the aid of his principal assistant, a man named Slavatsky. Zweigert's theory was that intellectuality, brain power, intelligence, call it what you will, was the result of the presence of a fluid which he called menthium in the brain. He thought that it could be transferred from one person to another, and with the aid of Slavatsky, he experimented on himself. He removed the menthium from an unfortunate victim who was reduced to a state of imbecility, and Slavatsky injected the substance into Zweigert's brain. The experiment resulted in death, and Slavatsky was tried for murder. He was acquitted of intentional murder, but was imprisoned for a time for manslaughter. He was released when the war ended, and for a time I lost track of him. I found translations of both the records of the trials and of Zweigert's original reports. And the thing that attracted my attention was that the puncture I found in the victim corresponded exactly with the puncture described by Zweigert as the one he made in extracting the menthium. I asked the immigration authorities to check over their records, and they found that a man named Slavatsky, whose description corresponded with the ill-fated Zweigert's assistant, had entered the United States under Austria's quota about a year ago. The chain of evidence seemed complete to me, and it only remained to find the man who was systematically robbing brains. Well, if such a thing was really going on, I felt that my reputation would make me an attractive bait, and I secured a double, as you know, and placed him in a position where his kidnapping would be an easy matter. I was sure that the victims were being taken away by air, and that lethane was being used to reduce the neighborhood to a state of profound somnolence. So I hid myself near my double with a gas detector, which would find even minute traces of lethane in the air. Well, my fish rose to the lure and came after the bait last night. When his ship arrived, I found a strange gas in the air. I followed the ship by the trail of the substance which it left behind. Carnes was with me. We got here in time to witness the extraction of the menthium from my friend, Professor Williams of Yale, and to see it injected into one of Slavatsky's gang. I sent Carnes for help and messed around until I was captured myself. Well, help arrived for me just in time. That's about all there is to tell. I'm now about to reverse the process and try and remove the stolen brains from the criminals and restore them to their rightful owners. Well, I never operated, and the result might be fatal. So, shall I proceed? The President and Admiral Clay consulted for a moment in hushed tones. "Go on with your experiments, Dr. Bird," said the President, "and we will hold you blameless for failure. You've worked so many miracles in the past. We have every confidence in you." Dr. Bird bowed in acknowledgement to the compliment and bent over the unconscious dwarf. With Willis directing every move, he inserted the needle and drew back slowly on the plunger. 23½ cubic centimeters of amber fluid flowed into the syringe before a speck of blood appeared. "Enough!" cried Willis. Dr. Bird withdrew the syringe and motioned to Admiral Clay. The man the Admiral had brought in was placed in the chair and lethane administered. He was laid on the table, and, with a silent prayer, Dr. Bird inserted the needle and pressed the plunger. When 5¼ centimeters had flowed into the man's brains, he withdrew the needle and held the bottle which Carnes had used to revive him under the man's nose. The patient coughed a moment and sat up. "Golly, where am I?" he demanded. His gaze roved the cave and fell on the President. "Oh, hello, Robert," he exclaimed. "What's happened?" With a cry of joy, the President sprang forward and shook the hand of the man. "You all right, William?" he asked anxiously. "Do you feel perfectly normal?" "Of course I do. Neck feels a little stiff." "What you talking about? Why shouldn't I feel normal? God, how did I get here?" "Take him outside, Admiral, and explain it all to him," said the President. Admiral Clay led the puzzled man outside, and the President turned to Dr. Bird. "Doctor," he said, "I need not tell you that I again add my personal gratitude to the gratitude of a nation which would be yours, could the miracles you work be told of. If there's ever any way that can serve you, either personally or officially, don't hesitate to ask. Now, the other victims will be brought here today. Will you be able to restore all of them?" "I will, Mr. President. From Slavatsky's records, I find that I'll have enough if I reduce all of his men to a state of imbecility, except Willis. In view of his assistance, I propose to leave him with enough menthium to give him the intelligence of an ordinary schoolboy." "I quite approve of that," said the President, as Willis humbly expressed his gratitude. "Have you had time to make an examination of that ship of Slavatsky's yet?" "Well, I haven't. As soon as the work of restoration is completed, I'll go over to it. When I master the principles, I'll be glad to take them up with the Army-Navy General Board." "Thank you, Doctor," said the President. He shook hands heartily and left the cave. Carnes then turned and looked at the Doctor. "Now, will you answer a question, Doc?" he asked. "Ever since this case started, I've been wondering at your extraordinary powers. You've ordered the Army, the Navy, the Department of Justice, and everyone else around as though you were an absolute monarch. I know the President was behind you. What puzzles me is how he came to be so vitally interested in this case." Dr. Bird smiled quizzically at the detective. "And even the Secret Service doesn't know everything," he said. "Evidently you didn't recognize the man whose memory I restored. Besides being one of the most brilliant corporation executives in the country, he has another unique distinction. He happens to be the only brother of the President of the United States." The Memory Machine. Chapter 1. Band of Brothers. Looking out at the scenery, Daniel had to admit that Gerard Ripley had made the best decision. The iguana man had told Daniel that he knew someone in Kentucky who could help him with his case. After Ripley explained the situation, Daniel mulled it over and finally agreed to the trip. "How are we going?" Daniel had asked. "We flying or going some other way?" "We're driving." "What? We're driving there?" Daniel stared in disbelief. "You want us to travel from California to Kentucky by car?" "That's right. Long-distance car trips are certainly not unheard of, and I think it'll be beneficial for you." He was right. Although the trip had been long and at times draining, it had given Daniel a chance to unwind. He hadn't been allowed to take a turn at the wheel, but that just meant he had time to rest and reminisce. He spent a lot of time just gazing out the window at the scenery. Both the natural beauty of the diverse landscapes and the man-made splendor of the diverse cityscapes touched something in him. At times he felt at peace. Other times he thought of trips his family had taken when he was growing up, remembering good times, bad times, times that were both at once. They'd recently passed grassy fields and slate hills. Now they were driving through a small town. Up ahead, next to a local government building, was a monument with a howitzer, a few plaques, and a number of small American flags. "Yeah, pull over up ahead," instructed Daniel. Estes, who was taking his turn at the wheel, understood and obliged. Daniel thanked him and exited the parked vehicle. Kim followed him so he could pay his respects as well. Kim was humble about his service, noting that military service was compulsory in South Korea, and he merely did his duty to protect and help others. However, something about his tone and demeanor, as well as the reverence Ripley, Estes, and the others had toward him, suggested that Kim was selling himself short, that his actions were more heroic than his modesty permitted him to reveal. It made Daniel think of his late brother, but then again, so did a lot of things. The two solemnly gazed at the monument to the community's war dead. Though he wasn't from here, Daniel smirked in pride as he read a line stating that during World War I, that city didn't have a single man drafted. They had all volunteered. Daniel thought back to a counseling session he'd had with Simon and Ripley. "You've improved since you've been here," Simon told him. He was referring not just to his physical health, but his mental health too. In fact, his psychological state was what had shown the most improvement. When he first arrived, Daniel frequently had flashbacks and nightmares that led to violent outbursts and fits of crying or screaming. On the other end of the spectrum, he sometimes had spells in which he stared into space like he'd been given zombie powder. Though he still suffered the fits, spells, and whatnot on occasion, they'd decreased in frequency and intensity. His temperament had also improved, leading to fewer and less dramatic mood swings. He'd suffered from trust issues due to the torture he'd suffered at the hands of his captors, but his rescuers and new comrades had worked patiently to reassure him and help him heal. Daniel was happy for the progress he'd made, but he stumbled over his words. "Well, you all have helped me a lot. You've been good to me, all of you." "Thank you. I'm glad to hear it. However, I point it out not so we can have praise, but so you can have encouragement. Think of your progress and be of good courage, and don't bottle up your feelings. You've been through the mill, not just the experiment that gave you increased strength and abilities, but also the psychological torture those monsters subjected you to." Daniel lowered his head, and Simon continued. "Due to the trauma you suffered, you have flashbacks, nightmares, fits, mood swings, and so on. You have triggers, and I mean you really do have triggers, unlike these whiny college kids who are offended by everything." Daniel chuckled beside himself. Simon finished. "You know what you have, right?" Daniel chuckled again, but this time it was a brief and sardonic chuckle. He replied sadly, "Yeah, I know, and the irony's not lost on me. I never saw combat, and yet I have combat shock. That's nothing to be ashamed about. You've talked about being tough, and you're right. Having this condition doesn't make you less tough, less of a soldier, or less of a man. It just means you have a condition. A number of people, both military and civilian, have post-traumatic stress disorder. War veterans, police officers, firefighters, nurses, survivors of violent crimes and natural disasters, and even victims of cruel and constant bullying. And there's a stigma associated with it, but it shouldn't be that way. A person who lost a limb or who had a heart condition shouldn't be shunned or viewed as weak, and neither should someone with a mental illness. Daniel nodded. He spent a few minutes in silent thought. Ripley told him, "I hoped that prior to this you weren't the type who would despise someone with that condition." Daniel looked up at Ripley. His eyes grew rapidly hard and then burned with fury. He arose from his seat in a flash. "What kind of question is that?" Estes and Kim, moving calmly yet swiftly and resolutely, took defensive positions in front of Ripley. Ripley himself casually moved an arm to a better position for removing a weapon from his coat or belt, should the need arise. Simon leaned forward slightly in his chair in case he needed to take action. "How dare you ask me that? That's something only a monster would do. I've been arrogant in my life, and I've done bad things in my life, but I'm not that kind of a-hole. I'm tough, but I'm tough for real, not one of those mofos that tears down others to try and look tough. I don't knock down others to try and prop myself up. Only lowlifes do that. I always helped and supported my comrades. Anyone who's a basic training with me can tell you that, and anyone who doesn't is lying. Hey, if you don't believe me, then put the binding mask back on me, or inject me with something, and then ask me again. If I was still in the service, I'd help any of my brothers in arms. I don't look down on people unless they're apathetic or hateful or something. How can you even ask me that question? How dare you?" He stood there, steaming in anger, his breath starting to become ragged as a result of his outburst. Ripley observed him and then smiled. "I'm glad to see your heart. If you turn out to be hateful, then I would have had no use for you." Daniel was surprised. "You would have abandoned me?" "No, I still would have helped you recover so you wouldn't become a killing machine. I still would have been glad I'd rescued you. However, I probably would have turned you over to the proper authorities so you'd be locked up where you couldn't hurt anybody. You could have all the power, abilities, and training in the world, but if you were cold-hearted and didn't have a character, well, I'd have no use for you. Well, I came across as insulting your character, but I was trying to prove it. Now it's been proven. You've justified the trust I placed in you." Daniel was moved by this. He felt both amused and honored by the fact that, just like that, he'd placed trust in Ripley, and Ripley had placed trust in him as well. Well, that's good to hear. And the tension in the room began to dispel. Daniel sat down again. Simon told him, "Devastated cities can be rebuilt. Dry bones in the valley can have new life, and you can rise up and help others despite these setbacks in your life." Daniel thoughtfully nodded in agreement. Simon added, "Your character reflects well on your late parents." Well, the compliment caused both pride and sorrow to well up inside him. "Thanks. Ma and Pa were the best. They worked hard to raise us right. Well, me, my sister, and my late brother." He swallowed hard. "Take as much time as you need. Let me tell you, my brother was one of the greatest soldiers who ever lived." His voice took a reverent tone. "If I could be 1/10 the man he was, I'd be the proudest man in America. He was a hero, a real hero. Medals, accolades. And he would have earned twice, maybe 3 times as many if he hadn't..." His voice broke. "If he hadn't come home in a box." He felt tears sting his eyes. Feeling they might start streaming down, he pointed to his eyes and announced, "See this? This is pride right here. My brother was a hero." Simon nodded in agreement. "I would have liked to have met him. Yeah, he would have liked to have met you too." "Well, thank you." Daniel felt like a burning fog had formed in his brain and was infiltrating the rest of his system. His face felt flushed, his chest felt tight, his nerves felt on fire, and there was an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of his stomach. His entire system felt displaced and strained. He stood up. Excuse me. Of course. He calmly went to the clinic bathroom and locked the door. Then he immediately grabbed a towel, fell to his knees, and crammed as much of the towel into his mouth and face as he could. He let out a muffled scream that shook every fibre of his being. Then he sobbed openly, both for everything and for nothing in particular. When he regained his composure, however long that was, he arose, washed and dried his face, and rejoined the counseling session. "You all right?" asked Simon. "Yeah, I'm okay, thanks," replied Daniel. In the present, Daniel and Kim stared in silent thought for several moments. After a while, Kim patted Daniel on the shoulder as a gesture of camaraderie, and they turned to head back to the vehicle. It was no surprise that Ripley and Estes had also gotten out to pay their respects. Ripley didn't have any relatives in the service, but the Iguana Man had respect for those who had sacrificed so much. The fact that lizard people were barred from serving in the United States military was a divided issue. Some lizard people felt that they should be allowed to fight for the country they loved, and that had given them so many opportunities. Others said they were relieved that they wouldn't have to risk their lives for a country that looked down on them. As for Estes, he had his own story. One day, as Daniel, Kim, and Estes were talking, Daniel had asked Estes, "Did you have anyone in the army?" Estes looked uncomfortable. "My father and some other of my relatives." Daniel started to say something, but Estes held up a hand to stop him. It wasn't the U.S. Army, nor was it a choice. His expression hardened, and his hand took a hard grip on the cup he was holding. "I was born here. Papa wasn't. You can bet, though, that if he'd served in the U.S. Army, he would have been an asset." Daniel nodded. Estes gazed at his cup in sadness. "I thank God he got out of there, and that I was born here. With my powers, who knows what they would have done to me over there?" Daniel started to reflect, but his thoughts were interrupted by Estes holding the cup toward him. "I might not be perfect, but here's to America." Daniel smiled and tapped Estes's cup with his own. "To America." As the four headed back to the vehicle, Daniel thought about everything Ripley and his allies had done for him. Not only had they rescued him from those monsters that had treated him so cruelly, but they had also helped him heal and grow stronger. They'd also provided him with equipment so he could eventually become a vigilante and use his abilities to full to help others. From the very beginning, Ripley had made it known that while it would be nice if Daniel were to join Basilisk, it was only an option. Whether he joined was entirely his choice, and there'd be no hard feelings if he decided not to. He'd read the Basilisk bylaws and code of conduct, and he knew that there was nothing that would violate his moral code. Reflecting on everything, he'd made a decision. "Ripley," he called. Ripley stopped and turned to look, as did Estes and Kim. Daniel silently raised his right hand. Ripley immediately understood. "You're making this choice of your own free will?" "Yeah." The Iguana Man grinned warmly. "Excellent. This decision was yours to make, and I'm happy that you made the choice you did." He came up to Daniel and raised his right arm. "You swear to uphold and abide by the Basilisk Code?" "I do." Ripley took out a needle from his coat, took Daniel's hand, and pricked his finger 3 times. Daniel looked at the marks, 3 pricks in 2 rows. The top row had a prick on both the left side and the right side. The bottom row had just 1 prick on the left. "Those dots represent the letter F in the Braille alphabet," explained Ripley. "It represents Fidelis, the Latin word for faithful. Had you thought about a code name?" "No, I hadn't thought of that. I just now decided, and there's been so much other stuff on my mind." "Well, that's certainly understandable. Let's see. You have a great love of country, and have shown great loyalty. So how about devotee?" Yeah, I like that." Ripley nodded, and then shook his hand. "Welcome to Basilisk, devotee." Estes and Kim shook his hand and gave their congratulations as well. Daniel smiled as he drank in the feelings of belonging and acceptance. Chapter 2. Debriefing. When the quartet arrived at their destination, they saw a man peering through the window of the front door. The man turned to call someone, and shortly afterward he and a young woman exited the building. They watched as their visitors exited the vehicle. Ripley nodded in greeting. "Hello, Missy." "Hello, Ripley," Missy replied. Referring to the man beside her, she added, "This is my assistant, Kent." "Pleased to meet you," Kent told them. The thing that was most noticeable about Kent was the volume of hair grease he used. Estes could appreciate that. Estes was the only member of Basilisk that carried a folding brush and mirror in his weapons pouch. Missy turned her attention to Daniel. "This must be the young pup you spoke of." "Yeah, this is Daniel, alias Devotee," replied Ripley. Missy looked surprised. "Alias? Does that mean he's a member of your group?" "That's right. He made the decision to join earlier today." "Well, that explains it. That doesn't matter either way. It's just that I don't remember you calling him a member when we spoke earlier." She approached Devotee and extended her hand. "I guess congratulations are in order then." Devotee accepted her handshake. Thanks." "Well, I have to say it means a lot that you agreed to come here to meet with me." They all understood her meaning. Her late father was a terrorist who was responsible for the deaths of over 36 soldiers. After his deadly attack on the military base, he had committed suicide to avoid capture. It had taken Missy years to recover from the trauma. Devotee replied, "One thing I've learned is that we're not our relatives." He looked down sadly. "Ripley told us about your brother. We're sorry for your loss." "Thank you." "I trust you'll keep his spirit alive." Daniel started to brighten. "Thank you, I intend to." "How was your trip?" "Long, but good." "Well, that's good to hear." She turned to the others then. "Come on in. I'm sure you're ready to stretch your legs." Kent held the door open, and everyone entered the building. The corridor seemed sterile, but the rooms beyond that had a homely feel to them. The living room furnishings included a couch, some chairs, and a table displaying some pictures. Among the framed photographs were childhood snapshots of Missy and her late mother. Daniel looked at the pictures for a while before taking a seat. "Would anyone like something to drink?" inquired Missy. "We have water, various sodas, milk, and some sweet tea. Of course, it's about time for supper, too. There's a tradition in our family that on the evening guests come, we order in or go out to a restaurant so no one has to worry about food or chores." "What kind of places do you have here?" asked Daniel. "We have a diner, Mexican place, a couple of Asian buffets, some burger places, chicken places, and a couple of pizza places." Ripley announced, "The three of us," and gestured to Kim, Estes, and himself. "Twilight, Foam, and I tend to attract attention wherever we go, but if Devotee wants to go somewhere, that's fine." Daniel looked surprised, but delighted. "Well, what's the diner like?" "Oh, it's great," Kent replied. "They have steak and potatoes, fried chicken, salmon patties, peach cobbler." Daniel chuckled. "Did they tell you I'm from Georgia?" "What? No." He grinned. "Isn't that something? If I'd known that, I would have mentioned a different dessert so it didn't sound like a stereotype." And he added, "The Braves got rid of that one jerk, right?" Daniel chuckled again. "Yeah, I got rid of him some time ago." Kent, Daniel, Estes, and Kim talked baseball for a while, and then Daniel decided he was ready to go. He and Kent freshened up a little before getting into Kent's car and heading to town. Missy retrieved some takeout menus, selected one, and handed it to Kim. "Here's a great place. They sell pizza and sandwiches, and also rent movies. Most of them are bad slasher films, but there are some good ones, too." She retrieved a small notebook with a pencil tucked into the spiral binding and a few folded news articles tucked halfway between the pages. It was the same book she'd taken notes in when she'd spoken with Ripley. Among the notes were the following. 1. Patient experienced traumatic events prior to his captivity, including the death in war of his older brother and the murder of his parents. 2. Patient was abducted and used as a guinea pig in an experiment which gave him increased power. His captors then forced him to relive traumatic moments in his life, making his mind unstable. 3. Patient's been receiving counseling for PTSD. His progress is good, but further counseling is advised. 4. Patient has insinuated that he was driven to acts of violence as a result of trauma. His captors wanted to create a killing machine. Missy asked Ripley, "Do I have everything straight?" and handed him the notebook. Ripley read through the notes. Yeah, he's been through some kind of ordeal, all right. He started to hand the notebook to Kim. "Now read the article," Missy instructed. Ripley took out the article, unfolded it, started reading, and smiled in grim satisfaction. Estes and Kim looked at the article and, upon realizing what it described, gave the same grim smile. The article told how a SWAT team, acting on a tip, had raided a facility in California. Many of the guards put up little resistance, as though they were coming out of drug-induced stupors. The matter was being investigated, but several arrests have been made for conspiracy to perform illicit human experimentation, unlawful imprisonment, and other illegal activities. "And this is the case that article refers to?" asked Missy. "Oh yeah," replied Estes. "That was fun. We rescued Devotee from these creeps, then let the SWAT team do the rest." "Oh, go ahead. Keep that if you want." "Why, thanks." Estes refolded the article and tucked it into a compartment of his weapons pouch. Ripley explained, "With the evidence that was seized there, should be no reason for him to testify, but he's recovered enough that he can if necessary." "Do you know who the mastermind behind it was yet?" asked Missy. "I'm afraid not. But when we do find out who's responsible, it'll be a bad day for them." "Well, I just met Devotee today, but he seems like a nice guy. He seems like the kind who's always boasting about how tough he is, but you could trust to look after your invalid grandma. Well, he can be brash and arrogant, but his heart is in the right place. Now that his psyche is healing, you can see the kind of man he is. It's clear he cares about family. Does he have any family left?" "Yeah, he has a sister. She lives in Georgia with her husband and children. He's made contact with her, but right now he has no plans to visit or even have an extended conversation with her." It's not that there's bad blood," interjected Estes. "He says they've been distant ever since their parents were killed, but things aren't strained. He's, just not ready to see her." Missy thought of her own brother and noted, "I'm sure he has guilt he's carrying around, not to mention fear. Just needs time and effort." Kim added, "You probably saw him looking at those pictures. When we broke him out of that place, we also got a bag he had. Shortly after he awoke and we introduced ourselves, he wanted to know where his stuff was. He got into his bag and dug out a picture." "A family picture?" guessed Missy. "Right. He showed us later that it was a picture of his parents. He hugged that photograph close to him like a child, like it was the most important thing in the world. Well, I'm sure that to him it was the most precious item in the world. You can't blame him." "Well, heaven knows we don't. We were moved when we found out what it was and what the story was." Ripley then spoke again. "He wants to use his powers and abilities to serve as a vigilante. We've provided him with equipment in addition to counseling and moral support. In addition to armor similar to my own, we've provided him with a special shield. Since he generally hates firearms, this shield will be his primary weapon as well. He's told us that he's going to put a picture of his family onto the back of his shield as a source of encouragement." Estes looked at Ripley eagerly when the shield was mentioned. Ripley knew this without even looking, and he smirked and told him, "Go ahead and tell the story." Estes grinned and reported, "When we gave him the shield, First thing he did after slipping it on his arm was to use it as a mirror. Looked at his reflection like, "You beautiful doll." You can't blame him for that either. He gestured to his jacket and the rest of his outfit. "I know when I got these duds, I modeled them in the mirror for I don't know how long." Missy nodded. It's a proud feeling when you're like part of something and you can accomplish something. After the three gangsters had written down their orders, Estes handed the notebook and menu to Kim. Kim removed some papers from his jacket, set the notebook and menu on top, and handed the stack to Missy. Some reading material, eh? She set the stack on her lap. "I have a question. I'm honored you came to me, and I certainly appreciate the offer to reimburse me for any help I can provide. But why do you need me? For one thing, that Pathos fellow can read people's traumas, can't he? Or is it that he can tell people have experienced trauma, but can't tell what caused it?" "Usually, he can tell what caused a person's trauma," replied Ripley. "That's not the issue here. It's a matter of building trust. If Pathos learned someone's trauma and then blabbed it, no trust would be established. By learning a person's past but keeping it between the two of them until the person's ready to share with others, Pathos shows he can be trusted and forms a bond. By encouraging someone to share, but letting them do it on their own time, we show we can be trusted and that we care. Daniel wants to share more, but at the same time, it's painful. We could have employed drugs or hypnosis, but we thought it was best to see you." "That makes sense." She looked at the notebook and smirked at the desserts on Ripley's order. Who would have guessed that a lizard man could have such a sweet tooth? She picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello, is this the Mester residence? I have some out-of-town guests here. First, we have a barbecue rib sandwich with fries and a wild cherry milkshake. Next, we have 2 chicken strips, zucchini slices, apple fritters, cheesecake bites, and a Pepsi. Then we have a barbecue pork sandwich platter with fries and a Pepsi. And finally, an Italian hoagie platter with fries and a strawberry soda. That's right. Yes, do you either have Sleeping Beauty or the Muppets?" "Yeah, that's good. I'd like to rent both of them." "Okay, thank you, sir. Goodbye." She hung up the phone and explained, "I think we'll need something whimsical before the night's over." And she added, "Here in Kentucky, we know about horses. Sometimes a horse is unstable. A lamb or a kid is put in the stall to be a calming influence. I think one of you should come into the room with us to be a calming influence on devotee." Both Kim and Estes raised their hands. Ripley nodded that it was okay for both of them to go. "Okay then," responded Missy. "That settles that." Missy started reading through the papers, pausing periodically to ask questions or offer commentary. After the food arrived, she, Estes, and Kim went to eat at the kitchen table. Ripley stayed in the living room, noting that he didn't like to eat around others because he had germs. Ripley could be tough and fearsome, and he was definitely an intimidating figure, but he also had a compassionate side. Missy could tell during their previous conversation that he genuinely cared about Daniel's recovery and well-being, regardless of whether or not he joined Basilisk. Ripley was respected by his men, not as much for his power as for his wisdom and concern. Missy kept reading as they ate. She got to the parts which described the trials that Daniel was forced to undergo. In one instance, he was the subject of an attempted hanging, a test to see if he could withstand strangulation. The experience was uncomfortable, to say the least, but he passed the test, shrugging off the experience seconds after the rope was loosened. In another instance, he was bound, given an oxygen mask, and submerged in frigid water for nearly 48 hours. The experience had left him severely frostbitten, yet there was no lasting damage. His wounds were treated, and he healed quickly in response to rest and warmth. He was back in fighting condition within a couple of days. Missy shook her head. Worthless monsters. Traumatizing a guy so he's in no condition to fight back and forcing him to go through all these things. She looked up from the papers. Now that I know about the man, one thing that strikes me is how unnecessary this all is. He wants to be a hero, and you said he can be arrogant. What do you want to bet that if these creeps had approached him and told him, "Hey, we can make you a superhero if you can pass some tests," well, he would have just jumped at the chance. I think you're right, replied Estes. Didn't take much for him to show us his abilities. Crushing a phone by squeezing it, fighting non-stop for half an hour, holding his breath for so long, and so on. Well, it would have been a bring it on, I can do this kind of thing. Kim added, oh, these are sick people to do what they did, or to do it the way they did. Well, since they know about Troyes, do you think that they kidnapped him and then investigated his background? Or that they knew him before this? We've wondered that too. Either way, they're sick. Yeah, you're not wrong. The four finished their meals, and then Ripley, Estes, and Kim brought in the luggage. Eventually Kent returned and entered the house. In response to Missy's concerned expression, he explained, he's taking a stroll around the property. Think he's trying to clear his head. Wasn't any trouble. Oh, that's good. Tell him that his luggage has been brought through to his room, and I'm ready when he is. As an afterthought, she asked, did he get the peach cobbler? Ken chuckled. Yeah, he did. Had a nice conversation, too. Seems like a pretty cool guy. And that's good. Since it was a pleasant summer evening, Kent went back outside to wait for Daniel. About 20 minutes later, they entered the house together. Daniel announced, if you'll show me to my room, that'd be great. I'd like to rest a little. Missy nodded. That's understandable. And she led him to a small bedroom. He thanked her, moved his luggage aside, and sprawled out on the bed. Missy came back to find that Kent had turned on a game show for them to watch. While the rest of them watched and occasionally heckled the more incompetent and inane contestants, Daniel tried to rest as much as he could. Some of his physical weariness eased, but his mind was restless. After a while, he got up and headed toward the living room. Missy heard his footsteps and turned to face him. Are you, still ready? Asked Daniel. Yes, replied Missy. Chapter 3. Examination. Missy led Daniel, Kim, and Estes down a corridor and into a large room. It was obvious that it was a laboratory. Part of the room served as a chemical lab. Some of the cabinets bore warning labels, and one of them was fastened shut with a padlock, indicating particularly hazardous contents. There were various gas tanks, a first aid kit, a fume hood, a safety shower, and a large island with drawers, racks of test tubes, a sink, and gas nozzles for Bunsen burners. The other part served as a mechanical lab and a workshop. There were counters and shelves with various tools and machine parts, another first aid kit, a workbench, and more gas tanks. At the back of the area, a large tarp could be seen, covering various machines, and in front of that a pair of robots stood lifelessly. Daniel took in the surroundings as they walked. He looked ahead to where Missy was heading and saw a chair with armrests and a headrest. There was some kind of machine at the back of it, and above the headrest was some kind of device. Attached to the chair were the kind of electrodes used to monitor heart and breathing rates. Next to the chair was a small table, in addition to an IV stand with some kind of clear fluid. When they got to the chair, Daniel was able to examine it more closely. There weren't any bonds or shackles attached to the chair, which was reassuring. After glancing at the computer and processing station at the back, he gripped the helmet-like device and examined the inside of it. At the area where the ears would be were some kind of speakers. At the temple and forehead areas were what looked like bicycle lights, and all around were what he assumed to be sensors, like the kind used to monitor brainwaves. The visor was like a clear screen. He sighed and stated, So, this is the thing. Mm-hmm, replied Missy. Ripley explained what this does. It somehow records people's memories and allows others to view them, like a mental VCR. Oh, that's right. It's completely harmless. She gestured to the IV and explained. First you'll be knocked out, then comes the helmet. I'll be able to hypnotize you, so we'll find the memories we're looking for. I mean, we don't want to see someone showering by mistake. Devotee grinned. Good to know. I can record to a number of mediums, VHS, DVD, even Laserdisc. Laserdisc has the best sound and picture, so yeah, go with DVD. The others grinned. Missy continued. Okay, you're ready? Devotee saw movement. He turned to see that Estes and Kim had stepped to one side, allowing him a clear path back to the door. That was their way of saying it was entirely his decision. He nodded and told them, "This is why I came here. You two go on ahead." Estes and Kim nodded and were soon out of sight, leaving Daniel alone with Missy. Daniel removed his shirt and sat in the chair. Missy started attaching the electrodes to Daniel's chest and noted, "I read your file. Those monsters did a number on you." Yeah," Devotee replied simply. "One thing we were saying is how unnecessary it was. Well, you're a tough guy, we all know that." "Darn straight." "Well, these creeps could have approached you and said, 'Hey, we can make you a hero if you can pass some tests.' I can see you joining up with somebody who offered to do that. I can see that happening easily." His expression began to grow hard. "What does that mean?" "Huh? What does 'I can see it happening easily' mean? I wouldn't run with just anybody. It's not like I'm going to ditch Basilisk to run with any group of yahoos who dangle a carrot in front of me." Well, Missy was surprised, but she could understand why he'd reacted that way. "No, of course not. I'm sorry if it came across that way. It wasn't my intention to make accusations or anything. It's just you wanted to be a hero so much that you were willing to do almost anything. Am I wrong?" He admitted, "No, you're not wrong. I'm not one of those warped terrorist groups or anything like that, but no, you're not wrong. You wanted to be a hero so much that you would have subjected yourself to those grueling tests willingly. It would have been a matter of pride. Instead, they... Yeah, I see what you mean. Sorry about that." "It's fine," she reassured him. "Maybe I didn't word my thoughts well." She thought before continuing. Kim and Estes had disappeared from sight now, but that didn't necessarily mean they were gone. It was likely they'd ducked out of sight for a few minutes to make sure everything was okay. In any case, this was a chance to quell any doubts. She told Daniel, "Your response indicates you're loyal to Basilisk." "Jeez, why do you have to make it sound so clinical? Sure, I'm loyal. Wouldn't you be?" "Of course. I saw you had some blow-ups, but I guess there's a little fighting in every family." He sighed as he remembered. "I was in such a state that I would have blown up at St. Peter, Audie Murphy, and Mother Teresa. You can't judge me by the state I've been in." "Well, that's certainly the truth. Then they don't have to worry, eh?" "No." Devotee had become solemn. "I'm still recovering. I might make some bad moves in the future, but I'm not going to betray them or anything." "I can tell you're sincere. That's good." He paused thoughtfully and noted, "It's funny you should say there's a little fighting in every family. I hadn't thought about it like that, but maybe they are kind of like a family." Missy light-heartedly told him, "Don't worry. I'll keep it a secret that you got sentimental." Daniel snorted in amusement. "I don't care. What's it matter at this point?" There was a long pause then, which Missy took as a bad sign. She observed Devotee as he sat stilly. Finally he stated, "Oh, my dreams have died." She turned her head so Daniel couldn't see the tears that had suddenly formed in her eyes, but Daniel wouldn't have noticed them anyway. He was staring down with a gaze that was 1,000 yards away. "My old dreams have anyway. I'll keep going, work on some new dreams and making them come true. I can do that now." "Yeah, I think so," Missy replied. She cleared her throat so her voice wouldn't crack. "Keep going, like you say. You might find that your old dreams have life in them after all." "Yeah, I think you're right." Devotee sat silently as a tear threatened to run down his cheek, and then he came back to the present and said, "Let's just get on with it." Missy rubbed her eyes with the thumb and 2 fingers of one hand as though they were just tired or irritated. "Yeah, you're right." She opened a drawer in the small table, took out a juice box and handed it to Daniel. "The side effect of the anesthetic is a bitter taste in the mouth. This'll help." Oh, thanks. He braced himself as she took the IV needle. Do it. He barely flinched as she jabbed the needle into a vein in his arm. Missy activated the flow of the anesthetic, and by the time Daniel got the straw into his juice box to have a drink, he'd begun to feel its effects. Shortly after he drained it, he found it was almost impossible to keep his eyelids open. He laid his head back, and soon he was in a deep sleep. Missy gently opened one of her subject's eyelids. Confirming his unconsciousness, she removed the empty juice box from Daniel's now nerveless hand and set it on the table. As she went to the computer station, she caught a glimpse of a pair of shadows as two figures silently exited the lab. She smirked at her correct assumption as to the whereabouts of Estes and Kim, and then began the process of finding and recording Devotee's memories. Chapter 4. Found Memories. Daniel woke up sometime later. He'd been brought back to his bedroom. The door was slightly open, allowing someone to peek through the door discreetly to check in on him. Various cushions, pillows, and quilts had been arranged along the walls and furnishings just in case he woke up in an agitated state and began flipping out. He saw some bottles of water and fruit juice nearby. He got some water to relieve a dry throat and an unpleasant taste in his mouth. He rested his head after draining the bottle. He had the same feeling he'd had when awakening from a nightmare. He found himself quivering. After gathering himself, he looked around the room some more. His shirt was folded neatly and lying beside him on the bed. He also saw a portable DVD player and some DVDs. Among the titles were a couple of seasons of that cartoon with those magic little horses that had adventures and learned about friendship. Who would have guessed Missy was into that? Wait, were these Missys or Kents? If they were Kents, there was nothing wrong with that, as long as it didn't lead to perverse hobbies. Besides, maybe they were just there for visitors to watch. Daniel was tempted to watch an episode or two, but decided to go with something else. He looked at the Walker Texas Ranger DVDs with interest, but he decided that those would have to wait until later. Right now he needed something a little less actiony. He popped in a Nicolas Cage comedy, stretched out on the bed, and tried to unwind. After finishing up in the lab, Missy came through to the living room where the others were. Kent told her, "Hey, I peeked in on him a minute ago. He's woken up and he's watching something on the DVD player. Looks like he's doing all right." "That's good. I'm proud to say I got the dosage right, and as far as I can tell, the procedure went perfectly." She held up a DVD in a blue sleeve. "It's ready to be watched. I haven't watched it myself yet, so don't know what we'll all see." Ripley arose and walked over to her. "Foam and Twilight told me about the conversation the two of you had beforehand. It's a very sad thing for someone to say their dreams have died." He placed his hand atop her shoulder as a show of support. "We appreciate you giving him encouragement, and it's good to hear that he's determined to keep going." He then withdrew his hand. "I believe he has a future and a hope, and that he is going to do great things and do some good in the world." "I do too. With his determination and the help he's gotten, he can be a hero like he's wanted to be." "Exactly. Now, speaking of help, I recently spoke with one of our top members. She's been contacted about a potential alliance. The duo was one you've already had experience with as well." "Oh, them," replied Missy, realizing who he was referring to. "Well, I do have to admit that my former rivals are good people. They really do care about others. You know, too, that they've publicly admitted to dealing with mental illness, as have some of their allies. The timing of this is very interesting. Here we have a man recovering from trauma and trying to make something of himself, and someone who can sympathize with this situation approaches us about an alliance." I asked Daniel how he'd feel about joining them. Thankfully, he understood, and it wouldn't be an attempt to pass him off to someone else, and that we wouldn't feel betrayed if he decided to join them while he continued in his recovery. Well, he had mixed feelings, so I told him to take his time. It's his decision, just like joining Basilisk. We trust that whatever he decides, he'll always return to us because, like you said, we're all family now. He nodded toward the DVD. "Oh, whatever's on there won't change that. Now, let's not delay things any longer." Missy and Kent led Ripley, Estes, and Kim to a small viewing room. Missy connected the VCR DVD player onto the TV, turned them both on, inserted the disc, and grabbed the remote control. She and the others sat down to watch, and then she pressed play. The first scene was at night. Daniel was strolling and chatting with two other men. They looked to be about Daniel's age and bore what could be described as roguish grins. The conversation they and Daniel were having indicated a friendly relationship. "Any idea who those guys are?" asked Missy. "I think they might be a couple of his army buddies," offered Kim. "You're probably right," stated Estes, "but I hate to imagine these guys being in the armed forces." Kent agreed. "Yeah, they look like mofos, and not the good kind." "There's a good kind of mofo?" Missy inquired. Ripley scratched his snout, and as he did it, seemed to Missy that he pointed in Estes' direction. In the memory, the trio eventually parted ways. The screen became grey and silent, indicating a pause between recorded memories. That particular memory didn't seem remarkable, but it did have some significance. They waited for the next memory to start. Well, they had no way of knowing how far apart the first and second memories were, but they obviously occurred on different days because it was dusk in the second one. Daniel came out of a building and got into his car, about to open a can of soda pop when his cell phone started ringing. The caller ID read, "Ma and Pa." He answered it and heard a voice say, "You folks shouldn't have to put up such a fight." After such a stunned pause, Daniel demanded, "Who is this?" Well, the caller hung up. Daniel, quivering slightly, started the car. He bolted out of the parking lot onto the road. The next few minutes showed him speeding down streets as he raced toward his parents' house. "I bet the poor guy wanted to throw up," offered Kent, "and I feel queasy just watching this." Daniel reached the house and pulled into the gravel driveway. The door to the house was partway open. Daniel parked and then dashed out without stopping to remove the key from the ignition or close the door. He found the screen door knocked halfway down, as if it had been kicked violently by an intruder. He began searching and soon found a pair of bodies lying on the floor. The corpses of the elderly couple bore a number of bullet wounds. Daniel stood still for a moment before dashing to his parents' side and kneeling beside them. Their still open eyes stared lifelessly. Their wounds looked fresh, showing how recently their murder had occurred. The stunned, shaking Daniel reached out toward the bodies and then hugged them close. He began talking to them, as if denying the reality of what had happened would change it. The viewers remained silent, but they felt lumps in their throats and tightness in their chests as they absorbed the tragic scene. The screen cut to grey silence again. When it came back, Daniel was sitting in a small room. For some time, he just stared at the wall. "It's no wonder he's in shock," Ripley observed. Daniel's trance was broken after a police officer entered the room and started speaking to him. The officer was solemn yet sympathetic, and he tried to be reassuring. However, the audio was distorted, showing that Daniel was only half aware of what was being said. The officer asked him some questions about the phone call and the crime scene. After Daniel answered, the officer reassured him that they were doing what they could to investigate. He then escorted Daniel to the doors of the police station. A man, evidently a friend or neighbor, was waiting for Daniel. They got in his car and headed toward Daniel's home. Daniel stared out of the window, and then his vision blurred. The scene went dark as he buried his face in his hands and began to cry. The next scene had him barging into some juke joint. The place was a dive if ever there was one. The patrons and servers who were standing at the front backed away, alarmed at his angry entrance. He spotted his quarry and made a beeline toward their table. "It's those two guys from earlier," observed Estes. "I know you were involved," Daniel shouted at his former friends. They looked up at him in alarm. He continued. "So, what happened? You told someone there was a house to rob. Answer me." The two began denying any involvement in the deaths of Daniel's parents. Soon, however, one of them tried to hit Daniel while he was arguing with the other. It was a bad move. Daniel managed to dodge the blow and counterattack. This led to an out-and-out brawl. The two landed some blows, but Daniel gave as good as he got. All three ended up injured and exhausted. The worn-out Daniel panted and glared down at the duo, and he growled, "If I find out you were involved in any way, you're a dead man." Police finally arrived and took them all into custody. As a policewoman escorted Daniel to a holding cell to cool down, he looked at someone's desk calendar, sighed, and hung his head. Is that what you were doing? Ripley asked, rhetorically and gently. Asked Missy. The devotee told us he missed his parents' funeral because there was something he felt he had to do. I think we just witnessed what that something was. The viewers kept watching, curious as to whether it would turn out Daniel's former buddies had been involved or not. A new scene began. Daniel, satchel in hand, was walking close to a building. Suddenly his body jerked, as if he'd been shocked or stung. He staggered for a second, and then it seemed like the ground rose to meet him as his vision went black. When he regained consciousness, his blurry vision gradually focused. He started to take in the scene, then his eyes widened and darted around. He was bound in a chair with metal shackles. A number of IV needles had been jabbed into his limbs, torso, and even groin. That has to blow, remarked Missy. Kent replied, If by that you mean this is nightmare fuel, then, yeah, it blows. Daniel could see that the IV lines were connected to a nearby machine, which held a tank of mystery fluid. He was in what appeared to be some kind of laboratory, but he couldn't see anybody. I'm glad you're awake, a voice announced over a speaker somewhere behind Daniel. Your bag, in case you were wondering, is in your cell, where you will be taken shortly. Who are you? Daniel shouted. What's going on here? I think I'll keep my identity a secret. As for what's going on here, I think you started to figure that out when you saw all those needles in you. I'll go ahead and confirm it, though. To be tactless, you're my guinea pig now. The machine started beeping. The liquid it held began to glow and then flow through the IV tubes and into Daniel's body. The viewers realized that Daniel was bracing himself, likely to avoid giving his capture the satisfaction of hearing him cry out in pain and fear. They could also tell that the process was uncomfortable. Eventually the scene turned black again as Daniel passed out. The screen then turned grey. Missy paused and explained. I know from your reports that after Daniel was given his powers, he was subjected to psychological torture and to all these tests. I decided not to go into any of that since we already knew the details. That's good, replied Ripley. Now please, continue. The next scene started with Daniel sitting in his cell. A large envelope was slid through the food slot in the door. The outside of it had a message reading, We'll have some company soon, some associates of mine. He opened it cautiously. The envelope held 3 papers which appeared to be printouts of digital pictures. The first had a group of mercenaries posing for a group shot, like they were a sports team or something. The second one made Daniel freeze. It was an outside shot of the group coming to the door of his parents' house. Trembling, he went to the third. This one showed his freshly killed parents lying on the floor. Well, there's your answer, Ripley noted grimly. They knew him before this. They're responsible for everything. Daniel crushed the third sheet of paper and flung it against the wall of his cell. Did the same for the second sheet, but he hesitated with the first one. Eventually he took it and began staring at it. His eyes filled with tears as he did so, but his gaze stayed fixed on the picture of the mercenaries. Some time later someone came and escorted Daniel to a door at the end of the corridor. Daniel looked through the window and saw the group of mercenaries from the picture file into the large room, apparently responding to a summons by his captors. The guard then opened the door so Daniel could join them. Missy, called Kent. Missy turned and looked at Kent with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Kent, sensing what was coming, bore an expression of dread. Using the tone of a protective older brother, he warned, Don't look at the screen. Before Missy could react, she'd heard an enraged cry followed by rushed footsteps and then by gunshots. She followed Kent's instruction and resisted the temptation to look at the screen. She started hearing unsettling thuds and sickening cracks. The number of gunshots decreased while the number of thuds, cracks, and cries of pain increased. She heard Kim make an angry comment in Korean. She could guess what the translation was. Finally, there was nothing but the sound of ragged breathing. It's okay. It's over, Kent told Missy. Missy looked at the screen to see Daniel as the last man standing. The mercenaries were all lying on the floor in various states of consciousness and injury. The voice from the speaker told him, "Very well done. It appears you managed to dodge most of the gunfire, and the wounds you did receive don't seem to have affected you too much. You certainly did a thorough job. It'll probably take months for them to heal. Some of them might be crippled for life. We'll see to your wounds now. You're dismissed." Daniel and his escort started to leave, but the voice added, "Oh, here's something important. You know how you suspected a certain pair of having some connection to the raid on your parents' house? Well, you're right. An associate of mine came to your town and started asking questions, which they were eager to answer when compensation was offered. I decided I could use you. Your former comrades didn't intend for anything to happen to your parents, but nevertheless they set the ball into motion. I've invited them to come here, using the lure of power. After they arrive, I'll give them some special treatment, and then you can have some fun with your friends and playmates." "I don't think he's lying," observed Kent. "I don't either," replied Ripley, and explained how he learned about them. "Pause it," Kim requested, and Missy obeyed. Kim thanked her and then informed her. "Part of the way through, some of the men were trying to retreat. One tried the door they came through, but it had been locked." He pointed to some kind of barrels along the walls close to the ceiling. "I don't know what those bullets, gas nets or what, but, well, they're clearly weapons. Someone could have activated them and stopped this, but they just let it happen." Missy shook her head angrily. "Hiring killers and thugs to traumatize and fight someone, then betraying them and allowing them to be attacked. God, scum is too kind a word for this bunch." She added, "It sounds like they planned to give Daniel's friends and playmates the same treatment they gave him, the experimentation and torture. What do you suppose happened to them and to all those guys?" "I don't have to suppose. An associate of mine told me," Ripley informed her. "When the SWAT team infiltrated the facility, they found not only drug guards and evidence of experimentation, but also 2 fearful men imprisoned in a cell, and a clinic with seriously injured men being used as guinea pigs for various diseases and medicines." Oh, my gosh. It's a wonder that none of them died. Some of the arrested guards and workers claim they didn't know the extent of what was going on. The truth will come to light, but those thugs can get the treatment they need before paying for their crimes. It sounds like they've already gotten some punishment. She pressed the play button on the remote control then. Daniel was escorted to a bathroom. Before his wounds could be treated, he knelt by the toilet and began retching. His body trembled between each retch. The screen cut to grey silence before darkening to black for several seconds and stopping, a sign that the recording had ended. Apparently Daniel had been rescued before anything else could happen to him. The group sat in silence for a while as they absorbed what they'd seen and heard. Finally, Ripley noted, "When Pathos came to meet Daniel, he stood outside the clinic doorway and trembled for a while as he perceived his trauma. I can certainly understand why." Missy asked, "You said Basilisk was about 1,500 members, many of which have special powers, right?" "Yeah, that's right." "Well, I hate that whoever's responsible for this is still out there somewhere, like in a bad horror movie, but the thing is, that guy now has about 1,500 enemies to worry about." Ripley, Estes, Kim, and even Kent grinned. Missy went to the DVD player and ejected the disc. "What do you want to do with this?" "Well, I'm tempted to crush it into shards, but it might prove useful in stopping this monster someday." "That makes sense." As she carefully returned the disc to its envelope, she dryly joked, "I'll put it in my memory chest." The others smirked despite everything. Missy turned off the television set and asked, "So, which movie do you want to watch first?" Well, the vote was The Muppets. Missy suggested they all take a break and reconvene in the living room. Kent left and made his way toward Daniel's room. He poked in to see Devotee still watching the movie. Opening the door, he announced, "I have to say, Daniel, I would have been alongside you pummeling those guys." Daniel looked up. "Thank you for that." He paused the movie and sat upright on the bed. "I know you're trying to be sympathetic, but pummeling is too nice a word for what I did. Didn't bring my folks back, It was just what that monster wanted me to do. You regret what you were forced to do, so on Judgment Day it'll be your captors who will have to account for what happened, not you. Hey, thanks. I appreciate that. Kent leaned against the doorpost. Let me tell you what I'm doing here. I became Missy's assistant as a self-imposed penance for a failing of mine. It wasn't something I did as much as something I didn't do. I willingly became a servant as atonement for something in my past. Well, that sounds vaguely biblical, or like one of those saint stories from Catholicism or the East. Kent grinned. It does, doesn't it? Maybe someday I'll have a medal bearing my likeness. Devotee grinned as well. I'm the same, I guess. Gonna use all of my abilities to help others, to follow in my brother's footsteps. Well, that's good to hear. We're all pulling for you. Thank you, I'm sure you are. Devotee looked at the collection of DVDs. Resisting the temptation to inquire about the horse cartoons, he told Kent, it's a nice collection here. Well, we try to have a variety. Kent spied the partly open DVD case standing upright like a tent. Well, that's a funny one. Tempted to stay in here and watch the ending. Well, I'm tired, so... He unpaused the DVD and turned the player so they could both have a view of the screen. In case I nod off, one of us can watch it. Thank you. You know, the great thing about these kinds of movies is no matter how much mayhem they have to go through, the heroes always come out on top. Yeah, I like that too. Missy and Ripley were conversing in a corridor. Missy stated, Kent's a good man. I think that as we speak, he's commiserating with Devotee, doing some male bonding. Yeah, I think so too. Guessed that when I saw him leave the room, because of his facial expression and the look in his eyes. I'm glad Devotee's making new friends. As I've said, he's made such progress since his rescue. I think he somehow sensed at the beginning that he could trust you all. That's why he agreed to let you help him. Ripley thought of the night he gave Daniel the option to leave, but he'd chosen to stay as his house guest. Yeah, I think you're right. I'm glad he did. Come what may, I have faith in him. He's not weak. He's very strong. He's conquering himself, and he'll be able to conquer all things soon. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.